So hey guys, this is your favorite fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was the sage heir to a triple goddess bloodline. Naruto x Piper McLean x Hazel Levesque x Annabeth Chase, heroes of Olympus. But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom and the Labyrinth. The first sensation was of falling. A gut-wrenching, stomach-in-your-throat plummet through an endless, screaming void. Colors that had no name bled into one another, a cacophony of visual noise that tore at the senses. Then came the impact, a bone-jarring collision that was not with a solid surface, but with reality itself. Naruto Uzumaki gasped, his lungs burning as if he'd just inhaled fire. And his eyes snapped open to a world of oppressive gray stone and the cloying scent of damp earth and something ancient, something that had been left to fester in the dark for millennia. He was on his back, the rough-hewn stone floor cold against his cheek. His head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that was a distant second to the searing pain that radiated from the center of his chest. He pushed himself up, his movements sluggish, his limbs heavy as lead. A quick self-assessment revealed no broken bones, no immediate life-threatening injuries, but a profound exhaustion that seemed to have settled deep within his marrow. His memory was a tattered tapestry, a collection of fragmented images, the blinding light of a final, desperate jutsu, the faces of his friends, etched with a mixture of hope and terror. The roar of an enemy that was more a force of nature than a living being. And then, nothing. Just the fall. He was in a corridor, a massive, cyclopean hallway that stretched into darkness in both directions. The walls were a mosaic of different types of stone, as if the passage had been carved through the very foundations of countless different civilizations. Strange, unsettling symbols were etched into the rock, some glowing with a faint, sickly green light. The air was thick with a palpable sense of menace, a low thrum of energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Slowly, carefully, Naruto rose to his feet. He was wearing the tattered remains of his battle gear, the once vibrant orange and black now scorched and torn. He reached for the kunai pouch on his thigh, a reflexive action born of years of ingrained training, and his fingers found it empty. A flicker of alarm, quickly suppressed. He was a sensor, first and foremost. He didn't need his eyes to see, not really. He closed his eyes, extending his senses outward. The energy of this place was wrong. It was a chaotic, twisted miasma of emotions, a psychic residue of fear, and pain, and rage, left to congeal over eons. But beneath that, there was something else, a network of pathways, a dizzying, ever-shifting latticework of energy that defied all logic. It was a maze, he realized, but one that was not merely a physical construct. It was alive, in a way, and it was aware of him. A low growl echoed from the darkness ahead, a sound that was less animal and more the grating of stone on stone. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his senses narrowing to a fine point. He could feel it now, a presence of immense size and malevolence, moving with a ponderous, earth-shaking tread. He dropped into a low crouch, his body instinctively preparing for combat. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a man, or at least it had the basic shape of one, but it stood over 8 feet tall, its body a grotesque parody of human anatomy. Its skin was the color of granite, and its muscles bulged with unnatural strength. In its hands, it clutched a massive, double-bladed axe, the edges of which dripped with a viscous, black ichor. But it was the head that was the most monstrous. It was the head of a bull, with a bronze snout and a pair of wickedly sharp horns that curved towards the sky. The Minotaur. The beast let out another roar, a sound that was a mixture of rage and hunger, and charged. The stone floor cracked under its thunderous footsteps. Naruto didn't hesitate. He pushed off the balls of his feet, his body a blur of motion. He was fast, preternaturally so, but the Minotaur was surprisingly quick for its size. It swung its axe in a wide, decapitating arc, the massive weapon whistling through the air. Naruto ducked under the blow, the wind from the passing axe head ruffling his hair. He flowed around the beast's side, his hand lashing out in a knife-hand strike aimed at the back of its knee. There was a sickening crunch as bone and sinew gave way, and the Minotaur bellowed in pain, its charge faltering. It stumbled, and Naruto seized the opening. He leapt onto the creature's back, his hands clamping onto its horns. The Minotaur thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge him, but Naruto held on with a grip of iron. He channeled a surge of chakra into his hands, a raw, untamed energy that was different from his own. Yet somehow familiar. It was a wild, verdant power, the energy of life itself. A golden light enveloped his hands, and the Minotaur screamed, a sound of pure agony. The bronze of its horns began to glow, to heat up until it was the color of molten gold. With a final, desperate heave, the beast threw itself backward, slamming Naruto against the stone wall. The impact was jarring, and for a moment, his vision swam. He was thrown clear, landing in a heap on the floor. The Minotaur, its horns now a pair of misshapen, melted stumps, staggered to its feet. It glared at H.I.M. with eyes that burned with a malevolent intelligence, and then, to Naruto's surprise, it spoke. "You are not of this world," it rasped, its voice a gravelly rumble. "Your scent, it is old, ancient. The blood of the Earth Mother flows in your veins." Before Naruto could process the words, the Minotaur charged again, its rage renewed. But this time, Naruto was ready. He met the charge head-on, his body glowing with a faint, golden aura. He didn't try to dodge or evade. He simply raised his hand, his palm open. The Minotaur's fist, a hammer of stone and muscle, descended. But it never landed. He stopped a hair's breadth from Naruto's palm, held in place by an unseen force. The Minotaur strained, its muscles bulging, its face a mask of furious effort, but it could not move its arm. "My blood may be old," Naruto said, his voice calm and steady, "but it is my own. And you will not spill it today." He clenched his fist, and the golden aura around him intensified. The Minotaur screamed as its stone-like skin began to crack, fissures of golden light spreading across its body. With a final, explosive roar, the beast shattered, dissolving into a shower of golden dust that hung in the air for a moment before fading away, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of ozone and freshly turned earth. Naruto stood there for a long moment, his hand still outstretched, his breathing steady. He looked at his hand, at the faint golden light that still clung to his fingertips. This power, it was not his Rasengan, not his Sage Mode, not anything he had ever known. It was something new, something other. A soft sound from the corridor behind him broke his reverie. The scuff of a boot on stone. He turned, his senses on high alert, his body tensed for another attack. A figure stood in the shadows, a silhouette against the faint green glow of the runes on the wall. It was a young woman, tall and athletic, with a cascade of blonde hair that tumbled over her shoulders. She was wearing a simple, orange t-shirt and a pair of faded jeans, and in her hand, she held a celestial bronze knife. But it was her eyes that held him. They were a startling, stormy gray, the color of a thundercloud, and they were filled with an unnerving intelligence, a calculating, analytical gaze that seemed to be dissecting him, layer by layer. She was assessing him, he realized, not as a potential friend or foe, but as a problem to be solved. A puzzle to be unraveled. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying no hint of fear. Naruto relaxed his stance, letting the golden aura fade. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said. "And I have a feeling I'm not in Kansas anymore." The girl's eyebrow arched in a perfect, questioning curve. "Kansas," she repeated, as if the word was a foreign concept. "I don't know of any Kansas. But you were right about one thing. You are not where you are supposed to be. You are in the labyrinth. And not many people find their way out of here alive." She took a step forward, the bronze knife held loosely at her side. "My name is Annabeth Chase," she said. "And I think you and I need to have a long talk." The air in the labyrinth hummed with a palpable tension, a low frequency thrum that seemed to vibrate in Naruto's very bones. Annabeth Chase, he learned, was a daughter of Athena, a demigod, and she spoke of a world that was both utterly fantastic and strangely familiar. She talked of gods and monsters, of heroes and prophecies, and of a hidden world that existed just beyond the veil of mortal perception. Naruto, for his part, listened with a quiet intensity, his mind racing to connect the dots, to find some frame of reference in this new, bewildering reality. He spoke of his own world, of ninjas and chakra, of tailed beasts and a war that had threatened to tear his world asunder. He was careful with his words, omitting the more personal details, the losses that still felt like a fresh, open wound in his soul. Annabeth, in turn, listened with a rapt attention. Her gray eyes narrowed in concentration. She was, he quickly discovered, possessed of a formidable intellect, her mind a finely honed weapon that was every bit as deadly as the bronze knife she carried. "So you're from another dimension," she stated, not as a question, but as a conclusion she had reached after careful consideration of the available evidence. "And your arrival here, it has to be connected to the recent disturbances." "Disturbances?" Naruto asked. "The labyrinth," she said, gesturing to the ever-shifting corridors around them. "It's been unstable, more so than usual. Ages that were once stable have collapsed. New ones have opened up. And the monsters, they're more numerous, more aggressive. It's like something is stirring them up, drawing them here." As if on cue, a chorus of guttural clicks and hisses echoed from the darkness ahead. Annabeth's hand tightened on her knife. "Dracine," she whispered, her voice tight. "A whole legion of them." Naruto extended his senses. She was right. He could feel them, dozens of them, their cold-blooded energy a stark contrast to the chaotic warmth of the labyrinth. They were close, and they were coming fast. "We need to move," Annabeth said, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape route. Now. But there was nowhere to go. The corridor they were in was a dead end, the path behind them blocked by a recent cave-in. They were trapped. The Dracine swarmed into the corridor, a hissing, slithering tide of green scales and gleaming bronze. They were serpent women, with the upper body of a human female and the lower body of a giant snake. They were armed with nets and tridents, and their eyes glowed with a malevolent, reptilian intelligence. "Stand back," Naruto said, stepping in front of Annabeth. He took a deep breath, centering himself, and drew upon the new, unfamiliar power that surged within him. The golden aura returned, brighter this time, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. The Dracine hesitated, their hissing growing louder, a sound of both fear and aggression. One of them, larger than the rest, with a plumed helmet that marked her as the leader, pointed her trident at Naruto. "The whelp has the scent of the old blood," she hissed, her forked tongue flicking in and out of her mouth. "Kill him. The great stirrer will reward us handsomely." The Dracine charged, a wave of scaly death. Naruto moved to meet them, his body a whirlwind of motion. He was a dervish of destruction, his fists and feet a blur. He moved with a grace and fluidity that was breathtaking to watch, each movement precise, economical, and utterly lethal. A punch to the throat, a kick to the side of the head, a sweeping leg that sent a trio of Dracine crashing to the ground. But for every one he took down, two more seemed to take its place. They were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. Annabeth fought beside him, her bronze knife a blur of motion. She was a skilled fighter, her movements a dance of deadly precision. She moved with the calculated grace of a predator, her attacks targeting weak points, her defenses a wall of impenetrable bronze. But even with their combined skills, they were outnumbered, outmatched. A net flew through the air, and before Naruto could react, it was upon him, its weighted edges pulling him to the ground. He struggled against the enchanted mesh, but it was strong, and it seemed to drain his strength. The Dracine leader loomed over him, her trident poised to strike. "The old blood will be spilled this day," she hissed, a triumphant gleam in her reptilian eyes. Annabeth cried out his name, a sound of pure desperation. But she was engaged with a half-dozen Dracine of her own, and she couldn't get to him. Naruto gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He was trapped, his strength failing, and then, he felt it. A new surge of power, a wellspring of energy from deep within him, a force that was both ancient and new. It was a triple-stranded helix of power. Three distinct energies weaving together to form something more. The first was a raw, untamed life force, the power of creation itself. The second was a cold, inexorable pull, the power of entropy, of death. And the third was something else entirely. It was the power of choice, of destiny, of the infinite possibilities that lay in the space between life and death. The golden aura around him exploded outward, a concussive wave of pure energy that sent the Dracine flying. The net that had ensnared him dissolved into dust. He rose to his feet, his eyes glowing with a tricolored light, gold, silver, and a deep, royal purple. He looked at the Dracine leader, and for the first time, he saw not just a monster, but a life. He saw its past, its present, and the myriad of possible futures that lay before it. He saw the path that had led it to this moment, the choices it had made, the choices that had been made for it. He raised his hand, and a single, glowing EAD of golden light extended from his fingertip, connecting him to the Dracine leader. Your path ends here, he said, his voice a chorus of three, a harmony of life, death, and destiny. He didn't make a fist. He simply pulled, and the Dracine leader's life, her destiny, her very existence, unraveled. She didn't die, not in the traditional sense. She simply ceased to be. One moment she was there, a creature of scale and hate. And the next, she was gone, leaving behind not even a wisp of smoke. The remaining Dracine stared at the empty space where their leader had been, their reptilian NDS unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. And then, as one, they broke and fled, a hissing, slithering tide of terror. Naruto stood there for a long moment, the tricolored light in his eyes slowly fading. The surge of power receded, leaving him feeling drained, but also changed. He had a sense of a vast, untapped potential within him, a power that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Annabeth stared at him, her gray eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. What was that? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Naruto looked at his hands, at the faint traces of gold, silver, and purple light that still clung to his skin. I don't know, he said, his voice once again his own. But I think, I'm starting to understand. He looked at Annabeth, a small smile touching his lips. So, he said, which way is out? They walked in silence for a time, the only sound the soft scuff of their boots on the stone floor. The labyrinth seemed to be holding its breath, the chaotic energy that had permeated the air now strangely subdued. The monsters, it seemed, had learned their lesson. Annabeth, for the first time since he'd met her, seemed to be at a loss for words. She kept stealing glances at him, her brow furrowed in thought. Naruto could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to fit him into her worldview, to categorize him, to understand the impossible power she had just witnessed. That thing you did, she finally said, her voice hesitant. I've never seen anything like it. It wasn't magic, not in the way Hecate's children use it. It was something else, something older. It's new to me too, Naruto admitted. It's like, I have this connection to something vast, and I can feel threads, like the threads of a tapestry. And I can touch them. Annabeth stopped, her eyes wide. The fates, she whispered, her voice filled with a new and profound respect. You're talking about the threads of fate. Before Naruto could ask her to elaborate, a new sound reached them. The sound of running water. A fresh, clean scent cut through the stale air of the labyrinth, the scent of pine needles and wild strawberries. We're close, Annabeth said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and anticipation. I know this way. She led him through a series of twisting corridors, the sound of the water growing louder with each step. Finally, they came to a large, circular chamber. In the center of the chamber was a fountain, a simple, stone basin from which a jet of crystal-clear water sprayed into the air. This is one of the entrances, Annabeth said, a small smile gracing her lips. A back door, of sorts. Only children of Athena know about it. She walked to the edge of the fountain and knelt, splashing the cool water on her face. Naruto followed her lead, the water a welcome relief against his grimy skin. As he looked into the pool, he saw not his own reflection, but a swirling vortex of images, of a world that was bathed in a warm, golden light. He saw a summer camp, with kids in orange t-shirts engaged in a variety of activities, sword fighting, archery, a game of capture the flag. He saw a large, blue house with a wrap-around porch, and a strawberry field that stretched as far as the eye could see. And over it all, a sense of home. What is this place? He asked, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. Camp Half-Blood, Annabeth said, her voice soft with affection. Home. She stood up and offered him her hand. Come on, she said. There are people you need to meet. People who can help you understand what you are. Naruto took her hand, and together, they stepped into the fountain. The world dissolved into a swirl of light and color, and for a moment, he had the sensation of falling again. But this time, it was not a terrifying plummet into the unknown, but a gentle, controlled descent. They emerged into a sun-drenched clearing, the scent of pine and strawberries even stronger than before. They were standing at the edge of a large, grassy field, and in the distance, he could see the blue house and the strawberry fields he had seen in the fountain. He had arrived. He was in a new world, a world of gods and monsters, of heroes and prophecies, a world that was both terrifying and beautiful. And as he stood there, with the sun on his face and the hand of a new friend in his, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes and Awakenings. The transition was less a physical movement and more a recalibration of reality. One moment, Naruto was submerged in the cool, swirling waters of a magical fountain. The next he was standing on solid ground, blinking against a sun that felt warmer, more golden, than the one he remembered. The air itself was a symphony of new sensations. The cloying dampness of the labyrinth was replaced by the crisp, invigorating scent of salt from a distant sea, mingling with the sweet, almost intoxicating aroma of ripe strawberries and the sharp, clean fragrance of pine. Birdsong, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed, filled the air, punctuated by the rhythmic clang of hammer on steel and the distant shouts of what sounded like a heated argument followed by a burst of laughter. He was standing on the edge of a vast, emerald-green field that sloped gently down towards a valley. Dotted across the landscape a series of structures that defied architectural logic. A dozen cabins were arranged in a rough U shape, each one a unique and dramatic statement. One cabin was solid gold and shimmered so bright why in the sunlight it was hard to look at directly. Another was a severe, gray building with a barren garden of deadly-looking plants out front and an owl carved over the doorway. A third was long and low, painted a garish sea green and constructed from what looked like coral and seashell, a gentle mist perpetually clinging to its walls. It was a chaotic, impossible, and yet strangely harmonious sight. Annabeth released his hand, a small, genuine smile gracing her features for the first time. The grim determination she had worn like armor in the labyrinth had softened, replaced by a quiet pride. "Welcome to Camp Half-Blood," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that transformed her. Here, she was not just a survivor, she was home. Naruto's senses, still buzzing with the aftershocks of his powers awakening, drank it all in. This place was saturated with a strange energy, a vibrant thrum of life that was almost overwhelming. It was a stark contrast to the twisted, malevolent power of the labyrinth or the familiar, structured flow of chakra in his own world. This was something different, something wilder and more primal. Every tree, every blade of grass, and especially every person he could sense pulsed with a unique divine signature, a faint echo of some greater, more ancient power. He could see them now, the inhabitants of this impossible place. Teenagers and children, mostly, all clad in bright orange T-shirts that stood in stark relief against the verdant landscape. They were engaged in a dizzying array of activities. A group was practicing archery on a range, their arrows whistling through the air with uncanny accuracy. Another set was scaling a climbing wall that seemed to have streams of molten lava flowing down its face. In a sandy arena, two figures clashed in a dazzling display of swordplay, their bronze blades meeting with a shower of sparks. It was a warrior's camp, that much was clear, but there was a joy to it, an undercurrent of camaraderie that belied the deadly seriousness of their training. Their arrival had not gone unnoticed. Activity around the camp slowed as heads turned in their direction. A ripple of whispers spread through the assembled demigods. Naruto felt their eyes on him. A mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and in some cases, outright hostility. He was an unknown variable, an outsider who had emerged from a place of legends with one of their own. He met their gazes without flinching, his own calm and steady. He had faced down armies and gods. The scrutiny of a few dozen teenagers was hardly intimidating. "They're wondering who you are," Annabeth murmured, her gaze sweeping over the campers. "And how you survived the labyrinth." "Not many do." She started walking towards a large, 4-story farmhouse, its sky-blue paint peeling slightly in the sun. A wrap-around porch was cluttered with wind chimes, rocking chairs, and what looked suspiciously like a leopard's head mounted on the wall, its eyes tracking them as they approached. "We need to see Chiron. He's the camp's activities director. He'll know what to do with you." The term, activities director, seemed woefully inadequate for the being Naruto was about to meet. As they stepped onto the porch, The screen door creaked open and a man emerged. From the waist up, he was a middle-aged man with thinning brown hair, kind, crinkling eyes, and a warm, professorial smile that seemed to radiate a genuine sense of welcome. He wore a simple tweed jacket over a polo shirt, giving him the air of a benevolent college professor. From the waist down, however, he was a magnificent white stallion. His powerful legs and swishing tail a startling, yet somehow perfectly natural, sight. "Annabeth, my dear," the centaur said, his voice a deep, reassuring baritone. "I was beginning to worry. The labyrinth has been unpredictable of late." His wise eyes then shifted to Naruto, and for a moment, the benevolent smile faltered, replaced by an expression of profound shock and something else, recognition. No, that wasn't right. It was more like he was seeing an echo of something impossibly ancient, a ghost from a forgotten age. "Chiron," Annabeth said, her voice filled with respect. "This is Naruto Uzumaki. I found him in the labyrinth. He's not from around here." Chiron's gaze was intense, analytical. He looked at Naruto not as a boy, but as a confluence of cosmic forces he couldn't immediately identify. "That," the centaur said slowly, his voice resonating with an authority that spanned millennia, "is the understatement of the century." He took a step closer, his ovies clicking softly on the wooden planks of the porch. "Your energy signature, it is like nothing I have ever felt. It is threefold, a braid of power that sings a song I have not heard since the dawn of time." Before Naruto could respond, another figure shuffled out of the big house. He was a short, paunchy man with a blotchy, red nose and a sour expression permanently etched on his face. He was dressed in a loud, leopard print Hawaiian shirt and Bermuda shorts, and he clutched a can of Diet Coke in his hand with a pained expression, as if it were a poor substitute for something he truly desired. "Oh, great," the man grumbled, his voice thick with boredom and irritation. "Another one. As if we don't have enough brats running around, breaking things. Is this one your fault, Annabeth?" She corrected him through gritted teeth. "And his name is Naruto. Mr. D. This is, I don't care, Mr. D." Who Naruto vaguely recognized as Dionysus, the god of wine, from Annabeth's whirlwind explanation, cut her off. He squinted at Naruto, his watery, purple eyes holding a flicker of something more than just boredom. It was a grudging, resentful awareness. "He smells strange, like dirt and ozone and possibilities. It's giving me a headache." He took a long, noisy sip of his Diet Coke. "Chiron, deal with it. I have a pinnacle game to get back to. The satyrs are cheating again, I can feel it." With that, he turned and disappeared back into the house, the screen door slamming shut behind him. Chiron sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. "You must forgive Mr. D. His punishment has left him perpetually irritable." He gestured towards two chairs on the porch. "Please, sit, Annabeth, perhaps you could fetch us some nectar. I believe we have a great deal to discuss." As Annabeth departed, Chiron settled into a specially reinforced wheelchair that magically accommodated his equine lower half. He fixed Naruto with a look that was both deeply curious and profoundly serious. "You fought in the labyrinth," he stated. It wasn't a question. "A minotaur," Naruto confirmed. "And some snake women, Dracine, Annabeth called them. And you defeated them, alone." Again, a statement. Naruto shrugged. "I had to." Chiron leaned forward, his ancient eyes searching Naruto's face. "The energy you wield," Annabeth described it as a tricolored light. "Gold, silver, and purple. A power that didn't simply destroy, but unraveled." Naruto looked down at his own hands, half expecting to see them glowing. "It's new," he admitted. "Back home, my power, my chakra, it felt different. This is something else. It feels like three distinct sources flowing into me at once. One is warm and full of life, like a growing forest. The second is cold, empty, the feeling of an ending. And the third," he trailed off, struggling to find the words. "The third is like 1,000 different paths all opening at once. The power to choose which one to walk." Chiron's breath hitched. He stared at Naruto, his expression one of dawning, horrified awe. "Life, death, and destiny," the centaur whispered, his voice barely audible. "The domains of the most primordial of forces. Gaia, the Earth Mother, who births all life from her soil. Tartarus, the pit, who consumes all things in the end. And Anank, necessity, fate itself. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to dislodge an impossible thought. But that's impossible. No single being, not even a god, could be a direct heir to all three. They are cosmic opposites, fundamental principles of the universe. To house all three in a single vessel. He looked at Naruto, and for the first time, Naruto saw a flicker of fear in the ancient being's eyes. What are you, boy? Annabeth returned with 3 bronze goblets filled with a glowing, golden liquid. She handed one to Naruto. Her expression unreadable. Nectar, she explained. The drink of the gods. Be careful, drink too much and it will burn you to ashes. Naruto took a cautious sip. The flavor was indescribable, a liquid manifestation of his fondest memory, eating a bowl of Ichiraku ramen with Iruka-sensei after graduating from the academy. A warm, healing energy spread through his body, mending the last of his aches and pains and washing away the deep-seated exhaustion that had clung to him since his arrival. Your arrival here coincides with a great deal of unrest, Chiron continued, his composure regained. The labyrinth's instability is a symptom of a larger problem. We've been hearing whispers of a great stirrer, a force that is awakening ancient monsters, turning them against us. Your presence, with a power that resonates with the very foundations of the earth and reality, it cannot be a coincidence. Naruto took another sip of nectar. This great stirrer, do you know what it is? Chiron's expression darkened. We have our suspicions. An old enemy, one we had hoped would sleep for another age. Gia herself is stirring. He looked pointedly at Naruto. And you, a boy who smells of the earth, who wields a power that echoes her own. The gods will not view your arrival as a happy accident. They will see you as a threat, a pawn, or a weapon. The gravity of his situation settled upon Naruto with a crushing weight. He was in a new world, alone, with a power he didn't understand, and he was already being drawn into a conflict that was ages old. It was a familiar feeling. So what happens now? Naruto asked, his voice steady. Now, Chiron said, you become one of us. You will train, you will learn, and you will discover the truth of your heritage. For now, you will be placed in the Hermes cabin, the traditional home for all newcomers and the unclaimed. His eyes held a hint of pity. Until your divine parentage is made clear, you are an unknown. And in our world, the unknown is often the most dangerous thing to be. Annabeth, ever the pragmatist, stood up. I'll show him around, she said. The tour is mandatory. She gave Chiron a look. He'll need gear. Chiron nodded. See to it. The forges are working on new celestial bronze shipments. Perhaps Beckendorf can find something suitable. He looked back to Naruto, his expression a complex mixture of concern and wonder. Be careful, Naruto Uzumaki. You walk a path that has never been trod before. The world will watch to see if you forge a new road, or fall into the abyss. The tour was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Annabeth pointed out landmarks with brisk efficiency, her commentary a mix of historical facts, tactical assessments, and personal anecdotes. The lava-spewing climbing wall was, she explained, good for reflex training. The canoe lake was stocked with flesh-eating nymphs, so don't capsize. The strawberry fields were not just for show, they were the camp's primary source of income. Sold to mortals in New York City to fund their operations. They passed the 12 cabins, each more fantastical than the last. He saw the Ares cabin, a brutal-looking structure painted blood red, with barbed wire over the roof and the stuffed head of a wild boar over the door. Loud, aggressive rock music blared from within. In stark contrast, the Demeter cabin was a beautiful structure covered in living flowers, with tomato vines growing up the porch columns. As they approached a particularly striking pink cabin, adorned with lace curtains and smelling faintly of expensive perfume, Annabeth's nose wrinkled in distaste. Aphrodite's cabin, she muttered. Try to avoid it if you can. All they do is gossip, practice their makeup, and break people's hearts for fun. It was near this cabin that Naruto's senses snagged on something unusual. Amidst the cacophony of divine energies, there was one that felt muted. It was a powerful signature, undeniably divine, but it was being actively suppressed. Veiled behind a curtain of conscious effort. His curiosity piqued. He slowed his pace, scanning the area. He found her sitting alone behind the cabin, away from the preening and posturing of her siblings. She was sharpening a wicked-looking bronze dagger on a whetstone, her movements precise and focused. She was beautiful, stunningly so, with choppy, unevenly cut brown hair, and eyes that seemed to shift in color from brown to blue to green. Her features were perfectly symmetrical, her face a work of art, but there was a storm of conflict in her gaze that marred the perfect picture. She was wearing the same orange camp t-shirt as everyone else, but hers was stained with dirt and grease, and her jeans were ripped at the knee. She didn't fit the picture Annabeth had painted of the Aphrodite children at all. This, he knew instinctively, was the source of the suppressed energy. Sensing their approach, she looked up. Her multicolored eyes widened slightly as she took in Naruto. A flicker of surprise followed by a carefully constructed mask of indifference. Annabeth sighed. "Piper, I should have known you'd be hiding back here." The girl, Piper, shrugged, not taking her eyes off Naruto. "Better than listening to Drew drone on about her new mortal boyfriend," she said, her voice a low, melodic alto that held a surprising edge. "Piper McLean, this is Naruto Uzumaki," Annabeth said, making the introductions. "Naruto, this is one of our newer campers." "New, but already causing trouble," Piper said, a wry smile touching her lips. She stood up, tucking the dagger, Katoptris, into her belt. "So you're the guy everyone's whispering about. The one who walked out of the labyrinth." Her gaze was direct, searching. It felt less like she was looking at him and more like she was trying to read the story written in his soul. "Something like that," Naruto replied, meeting her gaze without wavering. Piper took a step closer, and Naruto felt a subtle shift in the air, a gentle, persuasive pressure against his mind. It was a soft, warm feeling, like the voice of a trusted friend telling you to relax, to open up, to share your secrets. "Tell me what you really are," the feeling seemed to suggest. "You can trust me." Naruto blinked. The feeling was pleasant, but it was also foreign. It was an attempt to influence him, he realized, a subtle form of mental manipulation. He didn't fight it, he simply observed it. And because it was not his own thought, not his own emotion, it had no purchase on him. It washed over him and receded, leaving him unaffected. Piper's eyes widened again, this time in genuine shock. A faint blush rose on her cheeks. She had used her charm speak, a natural, almost unconscious habit, and for the first time, it had utterly failed. It hadn't just been resisted. It had been completely ignored, as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. Most boys, and even some girls, would have been stumbling over themselves to please her. To tell her anything she wanted to know. This one, he just looked at her with a calm, curious expression. "You're different," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "I get that a lot," Naruto said with a small, easy grin that made her heart skip a beat for reasons she couldn't quite fathom. It wasn't a flirtatious smile. It was genuine, open, and completely devoid of artifice. In a world of masks and divine posturing, it was shockingly real. Annabeth, who had been watching the exchange with a shrewd, analytical eye, cleared her throat. "We're heading to the arena," she said. "Clarice is already gathering her siblings. They want to welcome Naruto to camp." The way she said, "welcome," made it sound synonymous with pulverize. Piper's expression soured. "Clarice, of course." She looked back at Naruto. A flicker of concern in her kaleidoscopic eyes. "The Aries kids play rough. You sure you're up for that?" Naruto's grin widened slightly. "I think I can handle it." The camp's arena was a sunken, circular pit with tiered stone benches for spectators. By the time they arrived, a crowd had already gathered. Word had spread like wildfire. The mysterious newcomer was going to fight. At the center of the arena stood a girl who could only be Clarice LaRue. She was tall and brawny, with stringy brown hair and a permanent sneer that made her look like she'd just smelled something foul. She was decked out in full bronze armor and held an electric spear that crackled menacingly. Behind her stood a half-dozen of her siblings, all looking equally unpleasant and eager for violence. Well, Clarice sneered as Naruto descended the steps into the arena. "Look what the hellhound dragged in. Annabeth's new pet project." "He's not my pet, Clarice," Annabeth said coolly from the stands, taking a seat next to a concerned-looking Piper. "So, prissy," Clarice said, ignoring Annabeth and jabbing her spear in Naruto's direction. Heard you got lost in a maze. Think you can handle a real fight? Naruto simply walked to the weapon rack at the side of the arena. He ignored the swords, spears, and axes, his eyes scanning the collection. He picked up a simple wooden staff, a bow, testing its weight and balance. It felt familiar, comfortable. Clarice laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A stick. You're going to fight me with a stick. 5 of you against me, Naruto said, his voice calm and carrying easily across the arena. You can have your armor and your magic spear. I'll just use this. The arrogance of the statement stunned the crowd into silence. Even Clarice's siblings looked taken aback. To challenge not just the head of the Ares cabin, but 4 of her siblings as well, with nothing but a wooden staff, it was either suicide or supreme confidence. Clarice's sneer turned into a vicious grin. Your funeral, prissy. Get him. The 5 Ares campers charged as one. They were a well-oiled machine, moving with practiced, brutal efficiency. 2 came from the sides with swords, trying to flank him, while 2 more charged from the front with shields and spears. Clarice hung back for a moment, her electric spear crackling, waiting for an opening. What happened next was a blur of motion so fast it was difficult to follow. Naruto didn't retreat. He moved forward, into the teeth of the attack. He spun the bow staff in a dizzying arc, the wood a blur. The first sword was deflected with a sharp crack. He used the momentum of the spin to bring the other end of the staff around, sweeping the legs out from under the second swordsman. He ducked under a spear thrust from the front, the bronze tip whistling past his ear. He flowed forward, inside the spearman's guard, and jabbed the end of his staff into the demigod's solar plexus. The boy gasped, the wind knocked out of him, and crumpled to the ground. Naruto didn't even pause. He spun on his heel, the bow staff a horizontal blur at waist height, and slammed it into the shield of the second spearman. The impact sent a shockwave through the demigod's arm, and he staggered back, his shield arm numb. 4 down in less than 5 seconds. The crowd was utterly silent. They had expected a brawl, a messy, brutal fight. Instead, they were witnessing a masterclass in precision and economy of motion. Naruto hadn't used any flashy moves, no bursts of golden light. He had used pure, unadulterated skill. Clarice, her face a mask of furious disbelief, let out a roar of rage and charged, her electric spear leveled. I'll kill you. She thrust the spear forward, a bolt of lightning arcing from its tip. Naruto sidestepped the blast, the electricity scorching the sand where he had been standing. He moved with a fluid, almost liquid grace, flowing around Clarice's furious attacks. She was strong and her attacks were powerful. But she was also predictable. She relied on brute force, leaving herself wide open. He deflected a powerful downward slash with his staff, the impact jarring his arms. But instead of pushing back, he let the staff give way, redirecting the force of her blow. He spun with the motion, using her own momentum against her, and brought the end of his staff up in a short, sharp jab that connected with the underside of her jaw. It wasn't a powerful blow, not meant to injure. It was just precise. Clarice's head snapped back, her eyes glazing over for a second. Her spear fell from her numb fingers. Naruto caught it in his free hand, spun it once, and then offered it back to her, hilt first. You're strong, he said, his voice still calm, but you're slow. You telegraph all your moves. Clarice stared at him, then at the offered spear, her face a mixture of humiliation and fury. She snatched the spear from his hand and, with a guttural scream of frustration, turned and stormed out of the arena. Her siblings scrambling to follow. A stunned silence held the arena for a long moment, and then, someone started to clap. It was one of the Stoll brothers from the Hermes cabin. Soon, others joined in, and in moments, the entire arena was filled with a roar of applause and appreciative whistles. Naruto simply leaned on his bow staff, a small smile on his face. He walked up into the stands and his eyes met Piper's. She wasn't clapping, she was just watching him, her multicolored eyes filled with a look of intense, unreadable fascination. He had done more than just win a fight. He had shattered her perception of what power was. It wasn't just about a pretty face and a persuasive voice. It was about this quiet, unshakable confidence. This absolute, effortless competence. Later that evening, The camp gathered at the dining pavilion, an open-air structure with a clear view of the Long Island Sound. Each cabin had its own table. As an unclaimed demigod, Naruto sat at the crowded, rowdy Hermes table, a chaotic collection of pranksters, thieves, and lost souls. He was an outsider, but for the first time in this new world, he didn't feel entirely alone. He listened to the chatter, picked at the magical plate that filled with whatever food he desired. He'd chosen a massive bowl of miso ramen, much to the amusement of the Stoll brothers, and observed the strange, dysfunctional family that was Camp Half-Blood. He saw Annabeth at the Athena table, deep in a strategic discussion with her siblings over a battle map. He saw Piper at the Aphrodite table, looking bored and out of place amidst her perfectly coiffed and fashion-obsessed siblings. She caught his eye from across the pavilion and gave him a small, conspiratorial smile, which he returned. After dinner, a sullen-looking Clarice led the Ares cabin in the nightly campfire sing-along, her voice gruff and off-key. The flames of the campfire roared 20 feet high, their color shifting to reflect the mood of the campers. Tonight, they burned a bright, excited orange. Naruto found a quiet spot away from the main group, leaning against a pine tree and watching the embers drift up into the star-dusted sky. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Chiron, back in his wheelchair form. "You made quite an impression today," the centaur said, his voice a low rumble. "To defeat Clarice is one thing. To do so with such elegance is another entirely. You fight like no demigod I have ever seen." "I had good teachers," Naruto said simply, the faces of Jiraiya, Kakashi, and his other senseis flashing through his mind. A pang of homesickness, sharp and painful, pierced through him. "Indeed," Chiron said, his eyes seeming to look into Naruto's very soul. "The question remains, however, who, or what, is your parent? The power you displayed in the labyrinth, it is not Olympian. It feels older, more fundamental, as if you are a child of the principles upon which the gods themselves are built." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "There are legends, fragments from before the Titanomachy, that speak of a triple goddess, a single being who embodied the cycles of creation, destruction, and fate. A being so powerful she willingly fragmented herself, for fear that her unified consciousness would unmake reality itself. It was always considered a myth, a creation story to explain the unexplainable." He looked at Naruto, his gaze unwavering. Until today. Before Naruto could process the staggering implication, a commotion broke out near the campfire. A girl from the Apollo cabin had collapsed, her eyes glowing with a faint green light. A collective gasp went through the campers. "The Oracle," Chiron breathed, his face paling. Green smoke, thick and cloying, began to pour from the girl's mouth. Coiling in the air, a voice, ancient and raspy, echoed through the clearing, a voice that was not the girl's own. It was a chorus of 3 voices, speaking as one. "The heir of 3 worlds has arrived," the oracle hissed, its voice slithering through the minds of everyone present. "Born of life, death, and the unraveled thread." Every head in the clearing turned to stare at Naruto. "The Earth Mother wakes to claim her son," the voice continued, growing in power. "But the Piper's charm must break the chains, and Wisdom's daughter must navigate the maze of lies." The green smoke swirled violently, and the oracle's voice rose to a crescendo. "To face the stirrer's hand, the child of night must rise from gold's embrace. The 7 must be gathered, but the triple-blooded heir shall be their fulcrum, or their fall." The smoke shot back into the girl's mouth, and she collapsed, unconscious. The campfire sputtered, turning a sickly, fearful green before returning to its normal orange. An absolute, deafening silence descended upon the clearing. Chiron stared at Naruto, his face a mask of awe and terror. Annabeth was on her feet, her gray eyes wide with the terrifying weight of a new, impossible quest. Across the fire, Piper McLean was looking at him, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger, her expression one of dawning, frightening understanding. The prophecy had been spoken. A new great prophecy. And Naruto Uzumaki, the outsider, the anomaly, the heir of 3 worlds, was standing right at its heart. His quiet life, if it had ever been quiet, was officially over. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Fulcrum and the Child of Night. The silence that fell upon the clearing was a physical entity, a smothering blanket of shock and dread that was heavier than any mortal sound. The crackling of the campfire seemed impossibly loud, a nervous, flickering heartbeat in a world that had suddenly stopped breathing. Every eye, demigod and satyr alike, was locked on Naruto. He was no longer just the mysterious newcomer, the skilled fighter who had humbled the Ares cabin. He was now a figure of prophecy, the living, breathing embodiment of a destiny. O vast, it promised to either unite them or utterly destroy them. The fulcrum. Naruto himself felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him, an eye of the storm serenity that pushed back against the ushing weight of 100 terrified stares. This was familiar territory. He had been a child of prophecy before, the linchpin of a war that had decided the fate of his world. The names and faces had changed, but the suffocating pressure of a preordained path was an old, uncomfortable coat he knew how to wear. He met Chiron's gaze, his expression unreadable, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I understand. To the big house, Chiron's voice boomed, shattering the unnatural silence. Now, all senior counselors, Annabeth, Piper, Naruto. You three as well. His face was grim, etched with the worry of ages. He had seen prophecies come and go, had witnessed the rise and fall of heroes for 3,000 years, but the look in his eyes said that this was something new, something that played by a different, more terrifying set of rules. Mr. D, for his part, had lost all traces of his usual wine-addled boredom. He was on his feet, his purple eyes sharp and sober, scanning the faces of the campers with an intensity that was far more unnerving than his usual apathy. The god of madness was present, and he was not pleased. The rec room of the big house felt smaller, more claustrophobic than it had any right to be. The familiar clutter of board games and dusty trophies seemed to mock the gravity of the situation. A leopard head, presumably the one from the porch, was now mounted on the wall and watched the proceedings with glassy, inanimate eyes. The senior counselors filed in, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and in the case of Clarice Leroux, sullen resentment. They haired around a worn-out ping-pong table that served as the camp's war council table. Naruto found himself standing between Annabeth, whose mind was clearly already working at a furious pace, dissecting every syllable of the prophecy, and Piper, who looked pale and shaken, her hand unconsciously straying to the hilt of her dagger. Chiron took his position at the head of the table, his equine acting a soft thudding sound on the floorboards. Mr. D slumped into a chair, conjuring a Diet Coke and staring into it as if it held the secrets of the universe. Let us waste no time, Chiron began, his voice a low rumble. We have been graced with a new great prophecy. The first in decades. He looked around the table, letting the weight of the statement settle. And its meaning, I fear, is terrifyingly clear. We must dissect it, line by line. He looked directly at Naruto. The heir of 3 worlds has arrived, born of life, death, and the unraveled thread. Chiron's gaze was heavy. As I suspected, Naruto. Your heritage is not Olympian. It is primordial. The 3 worlds do not refer to continents, but to cosmic domains. Life, the power of Gaia. Death, the abyss of Tartarus. And the unraveled thread, that can only be Ankh. Fate, necessity itself. A collective gasp went around the table. Travis Stoll, representing the Hermes cabin, swallowed hard. You're saying he's the son of 3 different things. 3 primordial gods, not the son, Chiron corrected gently. The heir. The distinction is vital. It implies an inheritance, a convergence. A single vessel for 3 fundamental, and often opposing, forces. It is a cosmological impossibility, and yet, he stands before us. All eyes turned back to Naruto, who remained silent. He was processing the information, not with shock, but with a strange sense of recognition. The golden aura that had shattered the Minotaur, that felt like life, like Gaia. The power he had used to unmake the Dracine leader, pulling on the threads of her existence, that was the unraveled thread, Ankh. The third power, the cold finality of death, he had felt it within him but had not yet called upon it. He was a walking, talking paradox, a living union of creation, destruction, and the path between them. Annabeth spoke, her voice cutting through the stunned silence with analytical precision. The Earth Mother wakes to claim her son. Gaia, she's the great stirrer you mentioned. And she thinks Naruto belongs to her. She looked at him, her gray eyes narrowed. That makes you her primary target, and potentially, her greatest weapon. She won't just try to kill you. She'll try to corrupt you, to turn you to her side. A charming thought, Naruto said, his first words since the prophecy had been spoken. His voice was calm, aced with a dry irony that seemed to momentarily break the tension. I've dealt with manipulative super beings with a god complex before. I'm not easily swayed. Piper then spoke, her voice barely a whisper. But the Piper's charm must break the chains. She looked down at her hands, a wave of insecurity washing over her features. My charm speak, it's just a trick. A way to get people to do what I want. How is that supposed to help? Do not underestimate your gift, child, Chiron said sternly. A prophecy is never so literal. The chains may not be physical. They could be chains of loyalty, of deception, of despair. Your ability to persuade, to touch the hearts of others, may be the key that unlocks a path that no sword can open. Naruto met Piper's gaze from across the table. He saw her doubt, her fear that her power was a form of violation. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. He had seen her suppress her power earlier, had felt its gentle touch and recognized it not as a weapon of coercion, but as a tool of connection. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that Chiron was right. Annabeth tapped a finger on the table, her focus absolute. And wisdom's daughter must navigate the maze of lies. That's my part. It seems my fate is to be forever trapped in mazes. A flicker of a grim smile touched her lips. Gia will not fight us head-on, not at first. She will use deception, sow discord. My task is to see through it, to find the truth in her web of lies. Mr. D let out a loud, theatrical sigh. Yes, very dramatic. Everyone has their little part to play. But what about the important line? The action item. He pointed a chubby finger at Chiron. To face the stirrer's hand, the child of night must rise from Gold's embrace. That's your quest. Find this, child of night. Any bright ideas? Horse man. Chiron stroked his beard thoughtfully. Child of night, almost certainly refers to a child of the underworld. Hades, or in this case, more likely his Roman aspect, Pluto. The Roman god of the underworld was also the god of wealth, of the riches found within the earth. Riches, gold, Annabeth mused, her eyes lighting up with understanding. Gold's embrace, it's a riddle. It could mean a place, like Fort Knox. Or a person, like King Midas. Or it could be a reference to their parentage. A child of Pluto. But we have a child of Hades right here, Clarice grunted. Jerking a thumb towards Nico D'Angelo, who had been sitting in the shadows of the corner, almost invisible. Nico shook his head, his dark eyes seeming to absorb the light around them. It's not me. I can feel it. The prophecy isn't about me. His gaze flickered to Naruto, a flicker of something unreadable, respect, fear, curiosity, in their depths. He is right, Chiron affirmed. And the mention of Pluto, the god of wealth, strongly suggests a Roman connection. I believe the child of night is a Roman demigod. The room grew tense. The Roman camp was a legend, a myth, a place they knew existed, but with whom they had a long, bloody history of conflict. So the quest is to the Roman camp? Travis Stoll asked, his voice incredulous. It would seem so, Chiron said grimly. Which brings us to the final lines. The seven must be gathered. This prophecy connects to another, older one. The prophecy of seven. We have long known that 7 demigods would be chosen for a great task. Now, it seems, that time is upon us. And at the center of it all, he looked at Naruto. The triple-blooded heir shall be their fulcrum, or their fall. A fulcrum, Annabeth breathed, understanding dawning in her eyes. The pivot point of a lever. The point on which everything turns. His power can either lift us up to victory or bring everything crashing down. The pressure in the room was immense. All of it focused on the blonde young man who had, a day ago, been a complete unknown. Naruto pushed himself away from the wall, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. All right, he said, his voice cutting through the thick atmosphere of dread. So we have a prophecy. We have a quest. We need to go find a Roman kid of the underworld god who is probably somewhere surrounded by gold. And Gia, a psychotic earth goddess, wants to either kill me or adopt me. Did I miss anything? His blunt, almost casual summary was so unexpected that it startled a few of the counselors into a nervous chuckle. That is a remarkably succinct and accurate assessment. Yes, Chiron said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Good, Naruto said. Then let's stop talking about it and start doing it. The longer we sit here, the more time Gia has to prepare. The prophecy has named its questers. Me, Annabeth, and Piper. When do we leave? The sheer force of his certainty, his unwavering readiness to act, galvanized the room. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was treating this as he would any other S-rank mission. Analyze the objective, assemble the team, and execute the plan. And so, it was decided. The quest was sanctioned by Mr. D with a bored wave of his hand, a formality that belied the seriousness in his eyes. They would leave at dawn. The hours before sunrise were a blur of quiet, purposeful activity. They visited the camp armory, a cavernous, smoky building that smelled of hot metal and ozone. It was run by a burly son of Hephaestus named Jake Mason, who had taken over after the death of Charles Beckendorf. He looked Naruto up and down, his eyes lingering on the simple bow staff Naruto still carried. You're not taking a blade? Jake asked, gesturing to the racks of gleaming celestial bronze swords. You'll need something to get through a monster's hide. I have my own ways of getting through, Naruto replied politely, spinning the staff. In a deceptively simple-looking maneuver that was so fast it whistled in the air. But I'll take some armor. Something light. Jake nodded, impressed despite himself. He found a beautifully crafted cuirass of celestial bronze and leather. Light enough not to impede Naruto's speed, but strong enough to turn aside a blade. While Naruto was being fitted, Annabeth and Piper gathered their own equipment. Annabeth selected a new shield and a pack filled with ambrosia, nectar, and a variety of maps she had borrowed from her cabin. Piper, after some hesitation, strapped her dagger, Catoptris, to her belt. But also accepted a celestial bronze sword, her expression grim as she practiced a few clumsy swings. Later, as the first hints of gray light began to soften the eastern sky, Naruto found Pip sitting alone on the steps of the Aphrodite cabin. She was staring at her new sword as if it were a venomous snake. The usual chaos of her cabin was silent, its occupants still asleep. A sword doesn't feel right in your hand, does it? Naruto said, his voice soft as he sat down a respectful distance away. Piper jumped, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. No, she admitted, not looking at him. It feels wrong, heavy. My dagger, Catoptris, it shows me things, visions. It's a tool for seeing, not for killing. And my voice, I hate using my voice. It feels like cheating, like I'm forcing people, taking away their choices. Naruto was silent for a moment, considering her words. Where I come from, he said finally, we have something called genjutsu. Illusions. Some people see it as a coward's tool, a way to win without a real fight. But the true masters of it, they understand something important. The most powerful cage isn't made of steel, but of belief. The strongest chains are in the mind. He looked at her, his gaze direct and sincere. Your voice doesn't take away choice, Piper. It offers a new one. It introduces a possibility that someone might not have considered. You don't force them. You persuade them. You showed me that yesterday, when you tried to use it on me. It wasn't a command. It was a suggestion, an invitation to trust you. Piper stared at him, her multicolored eyes wide. He understood. He didn't just see the power. He saw the nature of it, the ethics of it. He didn't dismiss her fears or tell her to just get over it. He had taken her insecurity and reframed it, not as a weakness, but as a unique and valuable strength. The prophecy said you have to break chains, Naruto continued. Maybe the chains aren't on a person, but on their heart. Maybe they're chains of fear, or hate, or a lie they've been told their whole life. A sword can't break those kinds of chains. But a voice that speaks the right words, at the right time, that can shatter them completely. A single tear traced a path down Piper's cheek. She quickly wiped it away. How are you so sure of everything? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. I'm not, he said with a small smile. But I've learned that you can't win a fight if you go into it believing you've already lost. And you can't use a tool effectively if you hate it. Your voice is a part of you. It's not good or bad. It's just powerful. It's up to you to decide how to wield it. He stood up. Annabeth is waiting for us at Talia's Pine. It's time to go. He walked away, leaving Piper sitting on the steps, staring at him with a look of profound, dawning admiration. He hadn't just given her a pep talk. He had given her back a piece of herself. Their transport out of camp was Argus, the hundred-eyed head of security, who drove a plain white van. The journey into Manhattan was silent, each of the three questers lost in their own thoughts. Annabeth was poring over a map of the United States, her brow furrowed in concentration. Piper was quiet, but her back was straighter, her expression more determined than before. Naruto watched the world outside the window, a world so similar to his own in some ways, yet so fundamentally different. The sheer density of mortal life, all of them oblivious to the gods and monsters that walked among them, was staggering. Argus dropped them at the port-off Ority bus terminal with a grunt and a curt nod. From there, they were on their own. Annabeth, ever the strategist, had a plan. The prophecy mentioned Pluto, the Roman god of wealth, she explained, her voice low as they navigated the bustling terminal. That connection is our best lead. Before the gods went silent, my mother gave me a hint about a place where demigods could find information that was lost to time. The ruins of a forgotten oracle, hidden in the mortal world. She said it was located in a place where mortal wealth and forgotten history intersect. She unfolded a map of Philadelphia. The old Philadelphia Mint. It was the first mint in the United States, a place where the nation's wealth was born. Now it's just a historic site. It's the perfect place to hide. The bus ride to Philadelphia was long and uneventful. A lull before the inevitable storm. They arrived in the city of brotherly love in the late afternoon. The air was thick with summer humidity and the smell of cheesesteaks. The historic district was a jarring mix of colonial brick buildings and modern skyscrapers. The old mint was an unassuming structure, easily overlooked by the throngs of tourists. As they approached, Naruto felt a subtle shift in the energy of the world. It was a cold, slithering presence that seemed to emanate from the building itself. Something's in there, he said quietly. And it knows we're here. Gaia's reception committee, Annabeth muttered, her hand tightening on the hilt of her dagger. They entered the building, which was empty, closed for the day. The inside was a dusty, cavernous space filled with antique minting presses that looked like iron dinosaurs. In the center of the main hall, coiled around the largest of the presses, were two massive serpents. They weren't like the Dracinae. These were pure reptile, each 30 feet long with scales the color of tarnished pennies and eyes that glowed with a venomous green light. Scythian dracones, Annabeth breathed, her face pale. They guard places of ancient power. And they're notoriously hard to kill. As one, the two serpents lifted their heads, their forked tongues tasting the air. They hissed, a sound like scraping metal, and fixed their glowing eyes on the demigods. But there was something else in the room. A shimmering, ethereal figure of a woman stood beside the central press, her form translucent. She was beautiful, but her face was a mask of sorrow, and her wrists were bound by glowing, ethereal chains that seemed to be made of pure despair. She looked at them, her spectral eyes pleading. "This is it," Piper whispered, her gaze fixed on the ghost. The chains. One of the dracones lunged, its massive head a battering ram of scales and fangs. Naruto moved, a blur of motion. He didn't attack the beast. He pushed Annabeth and Piper out of the way, his bow staff a blur as he deflected the serpent's fangs, the impact sending a shudder up his arms. The second serpent spat a glob of green venom that sizzled and ate through the stone floor where they had been standing. "Annabeth, the lies!" Naruto shouted, his voice echoing in the vast chamber as he vaulted over the sweeping tail of the second dracone. "Piper, the chains, I'll keep them busy." He was a whirlwind of motion, a dance of distraction and evasion. He was impossibly fast, leading the two massive serpents on a chase around the minting presses. He used the environment to his advantage, leaping from machine to machine, forcing the beasts to get in each other's way. He wasn't trying to win, he was buying time. Annabeth, her mind sharp as ever, understood immediately. The ghost was the oracle, the source of information. The dracones were just guards. But the ghost was trapped, unable to speak. "She's bound by a curse," she yelled over the din of the battle. "A curse of sorrow," She can only speak of tragedies and losses. It's a maze of lies because any truth she gives will be wrapped in despair. The ghost drifted towards them, its mouth open in a silent scream. Tears of liquid silver streamed down her face. She was trying to tell them something, but the curse twisted her words into incomprehensible whispers of grief. I can't understand her, Annabeth cried out in frustration. Then stop trying to listen with your ears, Piper shouted back, a sudden, fierce confidence in her eyes. She stepped forward, facing the weeping spirit, her hands held out in a placating gesture. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaos of the fight, filled with a strange, compelling warmth. I hear your sorrow, Piper said, her voice resonating with an empathy so pure it was almost a physical force. I feel your pain. You don't have to be afraid anymore. We are here to help. Tell us what we need to know. Not with words of grief, but with the hope of what could be. It was charm speak, but not the kind she had ever used before. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, an offering of comfort, a gentle, irresistible wave of pure, unadulterated compassion. The ethereal chains around the ghost's wrists flickered. The spirit's weeping subsided, and her eyes focused on Piper with a dawning sense of wonder. The silver tears slowed. A single, clear thought, not a word, but a pure concept, entered their minds. An image of a Golden Gate Bridge, a city nestled in hills, and a Roman camp under siege from within. It was followed by a name, whispered on the wind of their thoughts, Hazel. But as the ghost's chains began to dissolve under the force of Piper's charm, the two dracones went berserk. They stopped chasing Naruto and turned their full, venomous fury on the girls. Naruto's eyes flashed. He had given them the time they needed. Now, it was his turn. He landed on the ground between the serpents and his friends. He planted the end of his bow staff on the floor and took a deep breath. He called upon the second of his three powers, the one he had yet to truly embrace. The air around him grew cold, and the faint golden light of his life force was replaced by a chilling, silver aura that seemed to drink the warmth from the room. Your existence ends now, he said, his voice a motionless echo. He placed a hand on the stone floor. The silver light flowed from his palm into the ground, a wave of pure entropy. It wasn't an explosion, it was an implosion. The stone floor beneath the two dracones turned to dust, not with a bang, but with a silent, terrifying finality. The massive serpents, their foundation gone, tumbled into the newly formed pit. But they never hit the bottom. The silver energy touched their scales, and they simply unraveled. Like the Dracene leader, they ceased to exist, their massive bodies dissolving into motes of silver dust before they had even finished falling. The room was suddenly silent and still. The ghost of the oracle gave Piper a final, grateful look before fading away completely, her chains broken. The pit in the floor remained. A perfect circle of non-existence, a testament to the terrifying power Naruto had just unleashed. Annabeth and Piper stared at him, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. The friendly, confident boy they knew was gone, replaced for a moment by something ancient, cold, and absolute. The silver aura faded, and Naruto's normal warmth returned to his eyes as he looked at them, his expression one of concern. Are you two okay? He asked. They could only nod, speechless. They had their answer. Their destination was San Francisco. And they were looking for a Roman demigod named Hazel. The journey west was a tense, hurried affair. They traveled by train, by bus, and once, for a terrifying stretch across the Nevada desert, on the back of a giant, friendly bronze dragon named Festus. Courtesy of a call for help to a friend of Piper's from the Hephaestus cabin named Leo Valdez. Gia knew they were coming. They were harried by earth spirits that rose from the dust of the lanes and narrowly avoided a cyclops in a Denver train station. Throughout it all, the three of them grew closer, forged into a cohesive unit by shared danger and a common purpose. Annabeth's strategies, Piper's emotional intelligence, and Naruto's overwhelming power and uncanny senses became a three-pronged weapon that overcame every obstacle. They finally arrived in the hills overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Below them, nestled in a valley accessible only by a heavily guarded tunnel, was a sight that took their breath away. It was not a chaotic summer camp, but a fully functional Roman city, complete with a forum, temples, and a colosseum. This was Camp Jupiter. The disciplined, militaristic energy of the place was a stark contrast to the wild freedom of Camp Half-Blood. As they made Heir way down the hill towards the Caldecott Tunnel, the main entrance, they were intercepted. A patrol of 5 demigods in full Roman armor emerged from the shadows of the trees, their imperial gold swords drawn. They were led by a girl with piercing black eyes, a regal bearing, and a purple cape that marked her as a praetor. "Greeks," the praetor said, her voice cold and hard as steel. "You are a long way from home. State your purpose before we are forced to treat you as invaders." "We come in peace," Annabeth said, stepping forward, her hands raised to show she was unarmed. "We have come on a quest." Before the praetor, Reina, could respond, the ground began to shake. Not a natural earthquake, but a violent, angry tremor. From the earth around them, humanoid figures made of mud and rock began to claw their way to the surface. They were Gegones, the Earthborn, Gaia's foot soldiers. The Roman patrol immediately formed a defensive circle, their discipline absolute. "For Rome," Reina shouted, and they charged. The fight was brutal. The Romans were skilled warriors, but they were outnumbered. As the battle raged, Naruto's attention was drawn to one of the younger Roman legionnaires. She was small for a warrior, with dark, cinnamon-colored skin and a mass of curly hair. Her eyes, he noticed even in the heat of battle, were the precise color of 24-karat gold. She fought with a spatha, a Roman long sword, her movements hesitant, as if she were afraid of her own power. And then, it happened. Overwhelmed by 2 Gegones, she stumbled and fell. In her fear and panic, she cried out, and the ground around her erupted. Not with more monsters, but with a shower of treasure. Gold nuggets, raw diamonds, and gleaming rubies burst from the soil like deadly shrapnel, striking the earth born monsters and causing them to crumble. The other Romans scrambled back, their eyes wide with fear and suspicion. "The curse!" one of them yelled. "Get away from her!" The girl, on her hands and knees, looked at the chaos she had caused. Her golden eyes filled with despair. "Go away," she whispered to the gems, and they slowly sank back into the earth, as if obeying her command. Gaia's soldiers, however, saw her as a target and began to converge on her position. The other Romans hesitated, torn between their duty and their fear of her curse. Naruto didn't hesitate. He was a blur of orange and black, weaving through the battlefield. He didn't use his life or death powers. This was pure shinobi skill. A kick here, a palm strike there. He moved with a speed and precision that left the Romans, and his friends, gaping. He dispatched the monsters surrounding the girl with an efficiency that was beautiful and terrifying to behold. He came to a stop in front of her, placing himself between her and the remaining monsters. His back to her, he didn't even look at the enemy. He simply held up a hand, and a spiraling sphere of pure, blue energy, a Rasengan, formed in his palm. He slammed it into the ground, and the resulting shockwave tore the remaining Gegones to pieces. Silence. The battle was over. The surviving Romans stared at the crater he had made, then at him, then at the girl cowering on the ground. Naruto dispelled the Rasengan and turned, the fierce warrior persona melting away to be replaced by a gentle, reassuring calm. He knelt down in front of the girl, ignoring the cursed ground around her. He looked into her golden eyes, not with the fear and suspicion she was so used to, but with a look of profound understanding and kindness. He offered her his hand. "The child of night must rise from gold's embrace." He quoted the prophecy softly, a small, knowing smile on his face. "Hazel Levesque, I presume." The girl stared at his outstretched hand, then up at his face, her golden eyes wide with a mixture of terror, confusion, and for the first time in a very long time, a flicker of hope. Behind them, the praetor Reina watched, her hand on her sword, her expression unreadable. The tense standoff between Greek and Roman hanging precariously in the balance. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Praetor and the Pariah. The world seemed to shrink to the space between Naruto's outstretched hand and Hazel's terrified, luminous gold eyes. The sounds of the forest, the wind in the pines, the groans of the wounded Roman legionnaires, the distant, angry horn signaling "reinforce me" NTS from the camp, all faded into a muted backdrop. In that moment, there were only 2 people in the clearing, the boy who was a confluence of impossible power, and the girl who believed her very existence was a curse. Hazel stared at his hand as if it were a brand, hot and dangerous. The Romans kept their distance, a ragged circle of fear and suspicion. Even Annabeth and Piper, standing just behind Naruto, held their breath, recognizing this as a moment more delicate and pivotal than any battle. This wasn't about fighting monsters, it was about saving a soul from the prison it had built for itself. I can't, Hazel whispered, her voice cracking. She scrambled backward, away from his offered hand, away from the cursed patch of earth where the scattered gems had already begun to sink back into the soil. You don't understand. I'll hurt you. I bring misfortune to everyone. Naruto didn't retract his hand. His smile didn't waver. Let me be the judge of that, he said, his voice a low, gentle current in the tide of her fear. Your power is a part of you, Hazel. It doesn't make you good or bad. It just makes you, you. I've had a monster inside me my whole life. I learned a long time ago that the only curses that can truly destroy you are the ones you allow to take root in your own heart. His words, simple and direct, struck a chord deeper than any pity or fear she had ever encountered. He wasn't looking at her curse. He was looking at her. The praetor, Reina, strode forward, her purple cape sweeping behind her like the wings of a great, predatory bird. Her face was a mask of stern authority, but her dark eyes were alight with a calculating intelligence that missed nothing. She noted the way the other Romans flinched away from Hazel, the way Naruto stood as an unshakable shield before her, and the way the two other Greeks, the blonde and the brunette, positioned themselves as support, not threats. You speak of prophecies and common enemies, Gracchus. Reina's voice was sharp, each word precisely clipped. The voice of a commander used to absolute obedience. Yet you arrive unannounced on our borders, a harbinger of chaos. The earth itself attacks us in your presence. Forgive me if I do not immediately offer you a banner of friendship. She pointed her gladius, not at Naruto, but at Annabeth. You, I know, Annabeth Chase. You were with the son of Neptune. Your last visit brought nothing but trouble. Quote. Annabeth's chin lifted, her gray eyes as hard as flint. Percy was a hero, Reina. He saved your camp. He destroyed our bathhouse. One of the legionnaires muttered. He also erased the memories of our entire legion to do it, Reina countered, her voice dangerously soft. We do not thank him for it. Now, state your purpose. Clearly, and without Grecian trickery. Before Annabeth could launch into a carefully constructed diplomatic argument, Naruto stood up, turning to face Reina fully. He moved with a liquid grace that was at odds with the tension of the moment. His posture relaxed but radiating a quiet authority that rivaled the praetor's own. There's no trickery, he said, his voice calm and reasonable. The earth goddess, Gaia, is waking up. She's stirring the monsters, turning them against both our camps. A prophecy was spoken at my camp, one that named me, Annabeth, and Piper. He gestured to each in turn. It said that to face Gaia, we needed to find the child of night. One who rises from Gold's embrace. It led us here, to Hazel. He looked back at the girl cowering on the ground, his expression softening. The prophecy didn't call her a curse. It called her a key. Gaia is afraid of her. That's why the Earthborn attacked her first. Your legionnaires see a pariah. A goddess bent on destroying the world sees a weapon that can be used against her. I'm inclined to agree with the goddess on this one. Reina's eyes narrowed. This was not the response she had expected. No boasting, no threats, no pleas. Just a simple, logical, and incredibly audacious reframing of the situation. He had taken their greatest fear about Hazel and presented it as their most valuable asset. A large, hulking figure stumbled out of the trees, breaking the standoff. He was a boy of about 16, with a broad, kind face that looked perpetually worried, and a physique that seemed too large and clumsy for his own body. He rushed to Hazel's side, helping her to her feet with a surprising gentleness. Are you okay, Hazel? He asked, his voice a low rumble. I saw the commotion from the barracks. He glared at the other Romans. Were you bothering her again? Stand down. Legionnaire Zhang, Reina commanded, though her voice lacked its earlier bite. This is official business. The boy, Frank Zhang, looked from Reina to Naruto's group, his expression a mixture of confusion and defensiveness. He positioned himself slightly in front of Hazel, a silent protector. Reina studied the tableau for a long moment. 3 Greeks, united and confident. One of her own legionnaires. A pariah, defended by both the outsiders and one of her own least respected soldiers. It was a political and tactical mess. Your claims are extraordinary, Reina said finally, her gaze locking with Naruto's. They require extraordinary proof. You will be escorted to the Principia. You will surrender your weapons, and you will answer my questions. All of you. She sheathed her sword with a decisive click. The Senate will hear of this. Pray to your gods that they are in a merciful mood. The journey into Camp Jupiter was a lesson in contrasts. Camp Half-Blood was a sprawling, chaotic collection of unique architectural statements. Camp Jupiter was a masterpiece of urban planning and military precision. A paved Roman road, the Via Praetoria, led from the Cald. Caught tunnel straight into the heart of the valley. They marched past disciplined cohorts of legionnaires drilling in the field of Mars, their armor and shields gleaming in the afternoon sun. The air was filled with the rhythmic stamp of marching feet and the sharp commands of centurions. Everywhere, translucent purple figures shimmered in and out of existence. Lares, Annabeth whispered to him, ancestral spirits. The weight of history and legacy was a palpable force here, a constant reminder of the generations of heroes who had served and died for Rome. Naruto's senses were on high alert. He could feel the structured, disciplined energy of the camp, so different from the wild, untamed power of Camp Half-Blood. He could also feel the undercurrents of fear and suspicion directed at them, thousand hostile eyes tracking their every move. But his focus was on the girl walking beside him. Hazel kept her head down, her shoulders slumped, trying to make herself as small as possible. Frank walked on her other side, a silent, lumbering pillar of support. Naruto deliberately matched his pace to hers, a subtle act of solidarity that did not go unnoticed. He projected a simple, calming aura in her direction. You are not alone. The Principia was the camp's headquarters, an imposing marble building with a portico supported by massive columns. Inside, the main hall was dominated by a long tab, covered in battle maps and strategic figurines. Two standards stood in a place of honor: the Legion's golden eagle, and a battered, archaic-looking standard adorned with the letters SPQR and a cluster of jangling medallions. But the most unnerving features of the room were the two life-sized metal dogs, one gold, one silver, that sat on either side of the praetor's chair. As Naruto's group entered, their ruby eyes glowed to life. And they rose, letting out a low, metallic growl. Aurum, Argentum, heel, Reina commanded as she took her seat. The dogs obeyed, sitting back on their haunches, Heir glowing eyes fixed on the newcomers. They have an unfortunate habit of chewing on liars, she explained, a thin smile on her lips. So, I suggest you speak only the truth. The interrogation was intense. Reina was a master inquisitor. Her questions sharp and relentless. She probed for any inconsistency in their story, any hint of deception. Annabeth met her question for question, a brilliant strategist sparring with a master politician. She laid out the thread of Gia, citing ancient texts and recent monster activity, building an irrefutable case for a coming war. Piper, remembering Naruto's words, used her power in a new way. She didn't try to force Reina to believe them. Instead, she spoke of the campers at Camp Half-Blood, of their bravery and their fears. She projected an aura of sincerity, of shared purpose. A subtle charm that wasn't meant to deceive, but to lower the walls of hostility. It was a plea for empathy, not obedience. When it was his turn, Naruto simply told the truth. He spoke of his arrival, of the power he had discovered within himself, and of the prophecy that had bound their fates together. He didn't boast of his strength, but he didn't hide it either. He projected an unwavering confidence, not in himself, but in the truth of their mission. Throughout his testimony, the metal dogs, Aurum and Argentum, remained silent, their ruby eyes glowing with a steady, non-threatening light. Reina was silent for a long time after they had finished, her fingers steepled before her lips. She was clearly impressed, and more than a little disturbed. Their story was insane, but it was consistent. And her lie detectors had not challenged a word of it. Just as it seemed she might be convinced, a new figure entered the Principia. He was a tall, thin boy with a mop of blonde hair and a faintly manic look in his eyes. He wore a toga over his camp shirt and was clutching a fluffy, disemboweled teddy bear. Praetor Reina, the boy said, his voice smooth and oily, a word of caution. I have just consulted the omens. This was Octavian, the camp's augur and a descendant of Apollo. The entrails of this sacred offering, he said, holding up the mauled stuffed animal, speak of a grave danger. He fixed his gaze on Naruto, a look of theatrical disdain on his face. The arrival of these, Gracchus, is a dark portent. They are an imbalance. A monster cloaked in a hero's skin has come to our camp. And he will bring ruin upon us all. He gestured dramatically towards Hazel. And he is drawn to the cursed one. The omens are clear. They must be cast out before their taint infects us all. Octavian's words were like poison, preying on the legion's deep-seated xenophobia and their superstitious fear of Hazel. Naruto could feel the mood in the room shift. The guards tensed. Reina's face hardened, her brief moment of consideration replaced by the stony mask of a praetor facing a political challenge to her authority. Reina held up a hand, silencing Octavian's rant. Your counsel is noted, Octavian. However, prophecy and omens are not the only factors a praetor must consider. Results are what matter to Rome. She stood, her gaze sweeping over Naruto's group, finally resting on him. You claim to be allies. You claim your quest is vital to our survival. Words are wind. Rome demands action. She pointed to one of the maps on the table. A nest of basilisks has taken root in the old military bunkers in the Berkeley hills. They have killed 6 of my legionnaires. My best patrols have been unable to clear them. Their gaze is death, and they are breeding. She looked Naruto dead in the eye, issuing a direct challenge. You want to prove your worth to the Senate. You want us to entrust you with one of our own for your quest. She tapped the map. Solve my basilisk problem. Return victorious, and you will have your proof. Fail, or refuse, and Octavian's prophecies will be the last thing you hear before my legionnaires cast you from our borders. Violently, Octavian smirked, confident that he had backed them into an impossible corner. Annabeth's mind was already racing, calculating the odds, the dangers. A basilisk's gaze was a near insurmountable weapon. Naruto didn't even glance at his friends. He met Reina's challenging stare with an easy smile. When do we start? His immediate, unhesitating acceptance seemed to catch Reina off guard. A flicker of respect showed in her eyes. Legionnaire Zhang, she called out. Frank, who had been standing silently in the corner, snapped to attention. You will accompany them. You are an expert archer, and you know the hills. You will be my eyes and ears. Do not fail me. Yes, praetor, Frank stammered, looking both terrified and honored. They were given temporary quarters in the barracks of the 5th cohort. As Annabeth had predicted, it was the cohort with the worst reputation, the dumping ground for the camp's misfits and outcasts. It was a long, plain building, a far cry from the grandeur of the other cohort's barracks. But inside, it was clean and orderly. While Annabeth and Piper discussed strategy for the upcoming fight, Naruto found Hazel sitting alone on her bunk, staring at the floor. He sat on the opposite bunk, leaving a comfortable space between them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. He was right, you know, Hazel said finally, her voice so soft it was barely a whisper. Octavian, I am a curse. Everything I touch, it falls apart. She looked up at him, her golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and the story poured out of her. She told him everything. About being born in New Orleans in 1928. About her mother, Marie, who had summoned Pluto and wished for all the riches of the earth. About her power, how precious gems and metals would erupt from the ground wherever she felt strong emotion. And how every gem was cursed, bringing tragedy and death to whoever touched it. She told him about moving to Alaska, where Gia had used her and her mother, forcing her to raise the giant Alcyoneus. And she told him about her death, how she had sacrificed herself to stop the giant from rising, dragging herself and her mother down into the fields of Asphodel. And finally, she told him how Nico D'Angelo, another child of the underworld, had found her and brought her back, a ghost living a second life decades after she was supposed to be dead. I don't belong here, she finished. Her voice choked with self-loathing. I cheated death. I'm a mistake. A monster. Naruto listened to her entire story without interruption, his expression one of quiet empathy. When she was finished, a profound silence filled the small room. You're not a monster, Hazel, he said, his voice firm but gentle. You're a hero. You made the ultimate sacrifice to stop a great evil. And your mother, she was manipulated by a goddess. You were a child. None of that was your fault. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze compelling. You say your power is a curse. But what did you do with it? You used it to stop a giant. You pulled cursed jewels from the earth. Has it ever occurred to you that your power isn't to create cursed treasure, but to control it? To pull it from the earth so that it can't hurt anyone else. You're not the source of the curse, Hazel. You're the warden. Hazel stared at him, her mind reeling. In all her years, living and dead, no one had ever suggested such a thing. She had always been the freak. The witch, the source of misfortune. He saw not a curse, but a responsibility. A power to be wielded for good. You can't change the past, Naruto continued softly. You can't change where you came from or what happened to you. All you can do is decide who you're going to be from this moment on. A pariah who hides from the world. Or a Roman legionnaire who us. Her unique power to protect her friends and her home. He stood up. The choice is yours. We leave for the Berkeley Hills in 30 minutes. The Berkeley Hills were a maze of hiking trails, eucalyptus groves, and old, forgotten military installations. Frank, despite his clumsiness, proved to be an able guide, navigating the overgrown paths with a quiet competence. The entrance to the basilisk nest was an old, concrete bunker half swallowed by the hillside, its iron doors rusted and askew. A palpable sense of death hung in the air. The gaze is the problem, Annabeth stated as they took cover behind a line of trees. Her voice a low, strategic whisper. One direct look, and you're dead. We have to fight them blind. She pulled two highly polished celestial bronze shields from her pack. We use reflections. Like the myth of Perseus and Medusa. It's our only chance. Inside, the bunker was a network of dark, damp corridors. The air was acrid with a reptilian stench. They could hear thering sounds echoing from the darkness ahead. They moved in a tight formation, Naruto at the point, his senses extended. He didn't need his eyes. He could feel the cold, venomous life force of every creature in the tunnels. 3 ahead, he whispered. Small ones. Around the corner to the left. They engaged. The fight was a terrifying, disorienting dance. They fought by watching the reflections in their shields. Their movements awkward and indirect. The basilisks were horrifyingly fast, like green streaks of lightning, their rooster-like bodies topped with reptilian heads. Frank fired arrows, banking them off the concrete walls to strike the creatures from the side. Piper, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, used her sword to defend Hazel. Hazel herself was nearly paralyzed with fear. She felt the familiar, dreaded tug in the earth beneath her, the siren call of gold and diamonds wanting to erupt. Don't make it worse, she thought, gritting her teeth. Don't bring them more misfortune. They cleared the first corridor. But they were already breathing heavily. In the main chamber, a larger cavern filled with discarded military equipment, they found the nest. A dozen more basilisks, including a massive one, easily 10 feet long, slithered amidst piles of gleaming, empty eggshells. There's too many, Frank yelled, knocking another arrow. The giant basilisk let out a piercing shriek and lunged. Not at Naruto or Annabeth, but at the weakest link, Hazel. Piper shoved Hazel out of the way, putting herself in the creature's path. She raised her sword, but she was too slow. Time seemed to stop. Then Naruto was there. He moved so fast he was little more than a blur. He didn't have a shield. He didn't need one. His eyes were closed. He landed in front of Piper, his back to the monster, and spun on his heel. Lashing out with a powerful kick, he connected with the basilisk's head, not with his heel, but with the sole of his boot, sending the creature tumbling back into its brood. Annabeth, strategy, he commanded, his eyes still shut tight. Frank, suppressive fire. Piper, protect Hazel. Hazel, I need a disruption, now. His voice, filled with absolute confidence in her, broke through her fear. The choice is yours. His words echoed in her mind. He wasn't asking her to fight. He was asking her to help. To be the warden. She closed her eyes and reached out with her senses, not to the cursed gold, but to the earth itself. She could feel the network of tunnels, the load-bearing walls, the veins of common, worthless iron ore. She saw a weak point in the ceiling, directly above the main nest. She focused her will, not with fear, but with intent. Just the iron, she whispered. She pulled. There was a deep groan from the rock above. Not gold or diamonds, but a shower of rusted iron ore and rock rained down on the nest. It wasn't enough to kill the basilisks, but it buried half of them, throwing the entire nest into chaos. It was the opening they needed. Annabeth directed Frank's arrows, calling out ricochet angles. Piper used her charm speak, not on the monsters, but on her friends. Focus. You can do this. We are a team. Her voice cut through their fear, a wave of courage and confidence. Naruto, meanwhile, became a ghost. With his eyes closed, relying entirely on his sensory abilities, he was an untouchable phantom. He flowed through the chaotic cavern like water, his bow staff a blur of motion. He never looked at a single basilisk. He felt their position, their trajectory, their intent, and he struck. A sharp crack of wood on bone, a sickening crunch, and another creature would fall. Its skull shattered. He was a master surgeon in a room full of scalpels, his precision absolute, his effectiveness terrifying. In less than a minute, it was over. The last of the basilisks lay broken on the floor of the cavern. The air was still and silent, save for the ragged breathing of the 5 demigods. They returned to Camp Jupiter just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valley. They didn't carry a trophy, but the proof of their victory was evident in their weary, grime-stained faces and the simple fact that they had all returned alive. Reina was waiting for them at the gates of the Principia, alone. She looked at the 5 of them. The 2 exhausted but determined Greek girls, the clumsy son of Mars, Frank Jong, now standing with a newfound confidence. The daughter of Pluto, Hazel Levesque, who held her head high for the first time, and the strange, impossible boy who had led them. She gave a single, curt nod. It was not praise. It was not welcome. It was an acknowledgement of a debt paid, a trial passed. The Senate will be informed of your success, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Octavian will not be pleased. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Permission is granted. Hazel Levesque will accompany you on your quest. She looked past them, towards the darkening horizon, her expression grim. You have bought us time. But Gia is not so easily defeated. Your prophecy is not the only one that speaks of the coming days. Go, fulfill your destiny. She turned and walked back into the Principia without another word. The first, fragile bridge between Greece and Rome had been built. It was a bridge forged in combat and necessity, and its keystone was Naruto Uzumaki. As Hazel watched him joke with Piper and discuss their next move with Annabeth, a small, unfamiliar feeling bloomed in her chest. It was not misfortune. It was not a curse. It was hope. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Salt-Stained Path and the Whispers of the Deep. Dawn at Camp Jupiter was a spectacle of disciplined beauty. The sun rose over the Oakland hills, its rays catching the imperial gold of the Eagle standard and glinting off the polished armor of the legionnaires already drilling on the field of Mars. The air was cool and smelled of dew-dampened grass and the faint, ever-present aroma of Roman discipline. There was no lazy morning chatter like at Camp Half-Blood, only the rhythmic cadence of marching feet and the clipped commands of centurions. Their departure was a quiet, formal affair. Reina met them at the northern gate, flanked by her 2 metallic hounds, Aurum and Argentum. She was not in her praetor's regalia, but in practical traveling clothes, a silent acknowledgement that their quest was now a part of her camp's larger strategy for survival. She did not offer handshakes or farewells. She offered resources. A legionnaire on a quest is entitled to a stipend, she stated, handing Annabeth a leather pouch heavy with golden denarii. This should suffice for mortal transportation and supplies. We have also packed ambrosia and nectar. Ours is more potent than the Greek version. Use it sparingly. She then turned to Hazel and Frank. And for a moment, the mask of the praetor softened into the face of a commander sending her soldiers into harm's way. Hazel Levesque, Frank Jong, you are representatives of the 12th Legion Fulminata. You carry the honor of Rome with you. Do not falter. Her gaze on Hazel was particularly intense. Your father is Pluto, one of the most powerful and feared of the gods. It is time you started acting like it. Let them see your strength. It was not a comfort, but a command, and it was exactly what Hazel needed. She straightened her back, her golden eyes meeting Reina's without flinching. Yes, praetor. Finally, Reina's dark eyes settled on Naruto. The respect she had shown him after the basilisk hunt was still there, but it was tempered with a deep, strategic caution. Your power is an unknown quantity. Naruto Uzumaki. It is a wild card in a game with impossibly high stakes. You have proven yourself an asset, but Octavian speaks for a large portion of the Senate. He will use any failure on your part as a reason to sever all ties with the Greeks. Do not give him that opportunity. Don't worry, Naruto said, his tone easy but his eyes firm. Failure isn't really my style. Reina allowed herself a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. There is a bus station in Berkeley. It is the fastest way south. Good luck. She turned without another word, her purple cape a flash of color against the morning light, and marched back toward the Principia, her metal hounds trotting silently at her heels. The five of them stood in the road outside the Caldecott tunnel. The sounds of the Roman camp fading behind them. They were a strange, eclectic group. 3 Greeks who had been in this world for varying lengths of time, and 2 Romans who had never set foot outside their protected valley. The air between them was thick with a mixture of hope and a profound, unspoken awkwardness. So, Piper said, breaking the silence. A bus. Fun. Annabeth was already studying a map Reina had provided. The prophecy of 7 mentioned that, to storm or fire the world must fall. Gaia is the earth. That leaves the sky and the sea as potential avenues of travel. A bus, it keeps us on the ground. On her turf. I don't like it. Reina's right that it's the fastest mortal method, Frank said, shifting his backpack, which looked comically small on his broad frame. But Annabeth has a point. The closer we are to the earth, the easier it is for her to send her children after us. Naruto sniffed the air, his head tilted. He could feel it already, a faint, cloying presence that clung to the land. A subtle pressure against his senses. Gaia was watching. No bus, he said decisively. And no planes. A child of Zeus or Jupiter in the sky is like a flying bullseye. We'll stick to the coast. Near the water. The sea is a different domain. It will help mask our trail. He pointed west, towards the glittering expanse of the San Francisco Bay. We'll follow the coastline south. On foot. The decision was met with a moment of stunned silence. On foot? Annabeth asked, her strategist's mind calculating the immense distance to Los Angeles and beyond. That will take weeks. It will take as long as it takes. Naruto replied calmly. It's not about speed. It's about control. This way, we choose the terrain. We'll be harder to track, and we'll see trouble coming long before it's on top of us. He looked at each of them, his gaze steady and filled with an unshakable confidence that was more persuasive than any argument. Trust me. And the most surprising thing was, they did. Annabeth, the logician, folded her map. Piper, the diplomat, gave him a supportive smile. Frank, the soldier, nodded his assent. And Hazel, the girl who trusted no one, found herself believing him without reservation. His certainty was a gravity well, pulling them all into its orbit. Their journey began, a long, winding trek that hugged the dramatic, beautiful, and treacherous California coastline. They navigated the urban sprawl south of Oakland, moving like ghosts through a world that was utterly oblivious to their quest. Piper's charm speak proved invaluable in these early stages. A sharp-eyed police officer would suddenly remember an urgent appointment elsewhere. A suspicious security guard would be overcome with a powerful desire to check the perimeter on the opposite side of the building. She didn't command them. She simply nudged their intentions, a gentle, invisible current guiding them through the sea of mortals. Once they were clear of the cities, the true nature of their journey began. The world opened up into a breathtaking panorama of crashing waves, sheer cliffs, and ancient redwood forests that crowded right up to the edge of the sea. The air was clean and sharp with the scent of salt and pine. For Naruto, it was a revelation. His own world had its beauties, but nothing like this raw, untamed collision of elements. He could feel the pulse of the ocean, a rhythmic, powerful beat that was the antithesis of Gaia's slow, slumbering malevolence. He could feel the ancient life force in the giant trees, a quiet, patient strength that had witnessed millennia. His connection to the life aspect of his power, the echo of Gaia, made the journey easier. He found hidden springs of fresh water, identified edible plants, and always seemed to know the safest path through a treacherous patch of terrain. He was in his element, a sage in the truest sense, reading the world around him not as a map, but as a living text. Hazel, away from the judgmental eyes of He Legion and buoyed by Naruto's quiet encouragement, began to explore her own abilities. One evening, as their mortal money was beginning to run low, she led them to a small, forgotten cove where a stream trickled down to the ocean. "My mother and we used to pan for gold in Alaska," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the stream. "There's a deposit somewhere nearby. A small one. Old." She knelt by the water's edge. Closing her eyes, she didn't pull. She listened. She felt the subtle vibrations in the earth, the dense, heavy signature of the precious metal. Following the feeling, she dug into the gravelly bank with her bare hands and pulled out a single, thumb-sized nugget of pure gold. It gleamed in the firelight, heavy and beautiful. "It's clean," she whispered, a look of wonder on her face. She held it out. There was no aura of misfortune clinging to it, no cold dread. "It's from before my time. It's not part of the curse." Naruto took the nugget from her palm, his fingers brushing hers. "You see," he said, his voice warm with pride. "You're not a force of nature, Hazel. You're a skilled professional. You just have a very specialized set of tools." The next day, in a small coastal town, Annabeth exchanged the nugget for a surprisingly large amount of mortal currency, enough to buy them high-quality camping gear, waterproof clothing, and a feast of real food that wasn't scavenged berries or cooked over a fire. It was a small victory, but for Hazel, it was a monumental one. She had used her power to provide for her friends, and nothing terrible had happened. She had been a blessing, not a curse. As the days bled into one another, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Frank, it turned out, was a surprisingly good cook, and his quiet, steady presence was a calming influence on the group. Piper became their social barometer, her emotional intelligence smoothing over the small frictions that inevitably arose from 5 demigods living in close quarters. Annabeth was their strategist and lore master, her knowledge of monsters and myths saving them from more than one potential ambush. Hazel became their navigator of the earth, her senses guiding them to safe places, to camp and warning them of unstable ground. And Naruto was their fulcrum. He was the unshakable center around which they all revolved. He trained with Frank in hand-to-hand combat, helping clumsy son of Mars understand the principles of leverage and balance, showing him that strength wasn't just about size. He listened patiently as Annabeth theorized about Gaia's plans, offering insightful, often surprisingly simple perspectives that she, in her complex analyses, had overlooked. He and Piper would often sit in comfortable silence, watching the sunset, a shared, unspoken understanding of the burdens of unusual persuasive powers passing between them. But Gaia was not idle. She did not send legions of monsters. Her assault was more insidious, more personal. She began to whisper to them. It started subtly, a flicker of movement at the edge of their vision. A familiar voice carried on the wind. Then came the nightmares, vivid and cruel, tailored to each of their deepest fears. Annabeth dreamed she was back in Tartarus, alone. Piper dreamed of her father trapped in a burning plane, calling her name. Frank dreamed of his piece of firewood, the lifeline tied to his mortality, smoldering in a hearth. Hazel dreamed of her mother's disappointed face, begging her to embrace the power of the earth and the riches that came with it. They would wake up gasping, the terror of the dreams clinging to them like a shroud. But they never faced it alone. Naruto seemed to have an uncanny sense for it. He would be there with a canteen of water, a quiet word of reassurance, or would simply sit with them, a silent, comforting presence until the shaking stopped. He claimed he didn't dream, or if he did, he didn't remember them. He was their rock, their anchor in a sea of psychological warfare. The main assault came one evening as they were camped on a desolate stretch of beach near Big Sur. A thick, unnatural fog rolled in from the sea, blanketing the coastline in a matter of minutes. It was cold and smelled of damp soil and something ancient and rotten, the smell of the grave. "This isn't natural," Annabeth said, her hand immediately going to the hilt of her dagger. "Everyone, stay close." The whispers started, no longer confined to their dreams. They seemed to come from all around them, slithering out of the fog. "Annabeth," a voice that sounded chillingly like Percy Jackson's sighed. "Why did you leave me? You found a new hero, didn't you? One with real power. You abandoned me for him." Annabeth froze, her face paling. Percy. No. That's not. Piper McLean. A chorus of Aphrodite girls' voices giggled. Still playing the hero. Your father is so disappointed. You could have been famous, beautiful. Instead, you're just dirty. Piper flinched as if struck, her confidence crumbling. Frank Jong. A harsh, grandmotherly voice chided. So weak. A disgrace to the family. Your life is so fragile, a tiny piece of wood. It will burn, and you will be forgotten. Frank stumbled back, his hand clutching at his chest, his face a mask of pure panic. Hazel, her mother's voice crooned, full of a seductive madness. My precious girl, stop fighting it. The earth loves you. It wants to give you everything. Just let go. Let the riches come. We can be powerful together. Gia has promised. Hazel cried out, stumbling to her knees, her hands pressed to her ears. The ground around her began to tremble, and the telltale gleam of gold and diamonds began to push its way through the sand. Naruto stood in the center of the spiraling despair, the fog swirling around him. He could hear the whispers too, but they had no purchase on him. They were a cacophony of unfamiliar voices, speaking of fears that were not his own. Gia was trying to find a crack in his armor, but she was guessing. Throwing everything she had at him. He heard the voice of the third Hokage, of Jiraiya, of his parents, but the words were wrong, twisted, lacking the truth of his memory. They were cheap imitations, hollow echoes. He looked at his friends, each trapped in their own personal hell, and a cold, protective fury rose within him. He saw Gaia's strategy for what it was, a maze of lies, designed to break them from the inside. To turn them against each other and themselves. Enough, he said, his voice quiet but resonating with an absolute authority that cut through the whispers. He closed his eyes, not to shut the world out, but to see it more clearly. He reached deep within himself, past the cold finality of Tartarus's echo, past the tangled threads of Ananke's power, and seized the vibrant, golden energy of life itself. It was Gaia's own domain, the power of the earth, but in his hands, it felt different. It was not the slow, possessive, slumbering power of the Earth Mother. It was pure, untainted, dynamic life force, the energy of a sprouting seed, of the warm sun on a spring morning, of a roaring, healthy fire. A golden aura, soft and warm, enveloped him. He didn't unleash it as a concussive blast. He exhaled it. He let it flow out of him like a gentle, irresistible tide of pure, benevolent energy. The golden light spread across the beach, touching everything. It did not burn the fog, it infused it, transformed it. The cold, damp chill was replaced by a gentle warmth. The scent of the grave was washed away by the fragrance of blooming flowers and fresh, clean earth. The whispers screamed, a sound of pure agony, and then faded into nothing. The illusions shattered. Annabeth gasped, shaking her head as the image of a resentful Percy faded. Piper's eyes cleared, the venom of her siblings' voices gone. Frank caught his breath, the phantom smell of smoke dissipating. And Hazel looked down at her hands as the gems and gold receded back into the trembling earth, leaving no trace. They all stared at Naruto, who stood in the center of the golden glow, his expression serene. He had not fought Gaia's power with its opposite. He had taken her own weapon, cleansed it of its malice, and turned it back against her, not as an attack, but as a healing balm. It was a display of mastery so profound it was almost insulting. He had told the primordial goddess of Earth that she didn't understand the first thing about life. The golden aura faded, and Naruto opened his eyes. He looked at his shaken friends, his expression softening into one of concern. Is everyone all right? There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Annabeth started to laugh. It was a ragged, breathless sound, perched on the edge of hysteria, but it was a laugh nonetheless. All right, she repeated, wiping a tear from her eye. No, but I think I finally understand. She walked over to him, her gray eyes alight with a fierce, brilliant intelligence. My part of the prophecy, she said, her voice filled with a new, energized purpose. Wisdom's daughter must navigate the maze of lies. I thought it meant I had to figure out Gaia's strategic deceptions. But it's not about that. She gestured to the now peaceful beach. This was the maze. This whole journey. She wasn't trying to stop us. She was trying to break us. And the lies she used, they weren't random. They were reflections of our deepest insecurities, yes. But they were also a map. She looked at Hazel. She tempted you with power, with the promise that you could be strong with her. That means she's afraid of your power being used against her. She looked at Frank. She reminded you of your mortality, of the fragility of your life. That means she's afraid of a sacrifice you might be willing to make. She looked at Piper. She attacked your sense of self-worth, tried to make you feel useless. That means your powers of persuasion, your ability to create unity, is a direct threat to her plans of sowing discord. Finally, she looked at Naruto. And her expression was one of pure, unadulterated awe. She threw everything she had at you, and none of it stuck. She doesn't understand you. You're an anomaly she can't comprehend. And that makes you the one thing she truly fears. Annabeth took a deep breath, her mind working at lightning speed, connecting the dots. She's not just waking up. She's consolidating her power. And she needs specific locations to do it, places where the veil between the mythical and mortal worlds is thin. The way she tempted Hazel, the talk of riches and power from the earth, it's connected. We're not just looking for demigods. We're on our way to stop one of her awakenings. They had survived. More than that, they had triumphed. They had faced a direct psychological assault from a primordial goddess and had emerged stronger, more united, and with a clearer understanding of their enemy than ever before. They were no longer just a collection of demigods on a quest. They were a team, a single, cohesive unit with an unshakable fulcrum at its center. As the last of the unnatural fog burned away under the light of the rising moon, they saw it. Further down the coast, the lights of a city twinkled against the darkness. It was Santa Monica, and from the famous pier, a strange, sickly green light pulsed faintly, a beacon of myth and magic in the mortal world that only they could see. "Well," Naruto said, a confident grin spreading across his face as he looked towards the glowing pier. "Looks like we found the next stop." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Pier of Broken Promises. The transition from the raw, elemental wilderness of the Big Sur coastline to the sprawling, electric-lit civilization of the Los Angeles basin was a jarring sensory shock. One moment they were king under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to touch, the next they were navigating the concrete veins of a metropolis that hummed with a restless, sleepless energy. The clean, salt and pine-scented air was replaced by a complex miasma of exhaust fumes, street food, and the faint, underlying perfume of a million different lives being lived in close proximity. Their destination, the Santa Monica Pier, rose from the edge of the continent like a creature of light and sound. It was a riot of color against the deep, velvet black of the Pacific Ocean at night. A massive Ferris wheel turned in a slow, majestic circle, its spokes a kaleidoscope of chasing LEDs. The tinny, cheerful music of a carousel blended with the electronic cacophony of an arcade and the enthusiastic cries of carnival barkers. The air smelled of popcorn, spun sugar, and the salty tang of the sea. It was a place built for joy, a monument to mortal leisure. And it was utterly, terrifyingly wrong. To thousands of tourists and locals thronging the wooden planks, it was just another Friday night. But to the 5 demigods, the pier was a discordant symphony. Naruto's senses were the first to register the dissonance. Beneath the surface layer of manufactured happiness, there was a thick, cloying psychic residue. It was the bitter taste of disappointment, the cold weight of frustration, the sharp sting of a child's tears after a rigged game. The laughter felt brittle, the smiles stretched thin. It was a place of broken promises, where the hope of winning a prize or having a perfect night was systematically ground into the dust of mundane reality. "Gaia's not hiding here," Annabeth murmured, her keen eyes scanning the crowd, analyzing the flow of people like a general studying troop movements. "She's feeding. It's like a psychic farm," Piper added, her own empathic senses recoiling from the overwhelming negativity. She rubbed her temples, trying to block out the low thrum of collective unhappiness. Every rigged game, every overpriced souvenir, every dropped ice cream cone, it's all generating this sludge. "So, what's the plan?" Frank asked, his broad shoulders tense. He looked deeply uncomfortable, a lumbering bull in a shop filled with fragile, oblivious porcelain dolls. "We split up," Naruto said, his gaze sweeping across the pier, taking in every light, every shadow, every potential threat. "Annabeth, you're with me," Your eyes and my senses, we'll get a strategic overview. Piper, you've got the best read on the emotional landscape. You, Hazel, and Frank, you three are ground team. Mingle, observe, find the source of the worst of it. Don't engage, just identify the epicenter. We meet back here at the entrance in 1 hour. There were no arguments. His authority was a settled fact, born not of command, but of repeatedly demonstrated competence. He wasn't their leader because he was the strongest, he was their leader because he consistently made the right call. As the others melted into the crowd, Naruto and Annabeth walked towards the pier's most prominent feature, the Pacific Wheel. If we want an overview, there's no better place, Naruto said, gesturing towards the slowly turning giant. Annabeth hesitated for a fraction of a second. The rational part of her brain, the part that had designed buildings and deciphered ancient prophecies, knew it was a sound tactical decision. But the part of her that had survived Tartarus, that had a deep-seated and entirely logical fear of great heights and enclosed spaces, screamed in protest. Naruto seemed to sense her hesitation. He didn't comment on it or draw attention to it. He simply moved to the ticket booth and then stood by the entrance to the ride, waiting for her, his presence a calm, unstated assurance. I'm here. You're safe. Taking a deep breath, she pushed down her fear and followed him. The gondola was a small, swaying cage. As it began its ascent, the sounds of the pier faded, replaced by the creak of machinery and the rush of the wind. The view was breathtaking. The pier was a glittering peninsula of light below them, and the vast, dark ocean stretched out to an unseen horizon. From up here, Annabeth said, her voice a little tight as she focused on the tactical view, you can see the energy patterns more clearly. The negative emotions aren't evenly distributed. They're flowing, like streams, all leading to one point. She pointed towards the far end of the pier, to a large, garishly painted building. The arcade. I feel it too, Naruto said, his eyes closed. He wasn't looking at the pier. He was tasting its psychic currents. It's a whirlpool, a drain. Something in that building is actively harvesting the despair. He opened his eyes and looked at her. In the enclosed space, with the shifting colored lights of the wheel playing across their faces, the intensity of his gaze was startling. You were scared, coming on this, he stated, not as an accusation, but as an observation. Annabeth's pride bristled. I'm not scared of a carnival ride. No, he agreed, his voice soft. You're scared of being trapped. Of falling. He didn't need to say the name of the place. They both knew. She looked away, out at the dark water. My mother is the goddess of wisdom and battle strategy. Fear is a tactical liability. It's a weakness to be overcome, not indulged. Fear is a survival instinct, he countered gently. It tells you when you're in danger. It keeps you sharp. Ignoring it is like ignoring a fire alarm because the sound is annoying. The smartest person I ever knew, my teacher. He was a coward in a lot of ways. Scared of fighting, scared of responsibility. But when it counted, when his friends were in danger, he was the bravest man I ever met. Fear didn't make him weak. Facing it made him strong. Annabeth was silent for a long moment, the gondola reaching the apex of its turn and beginning its slow descent. She had spent her entire life surrounded by demigods who postured and boasted. Who treated fear as a shameful secret. Even Percy, for all his bravery, often hid his terror behind a wall of sarcasm. This boy, he spoke of it as if it were simply another tool. Another piece of data to be analyzed and understood. You are an impossible creature, Naruto Uzumaki, she said, her voice a low murmur of intellectual fascination. Your very existence vile. Atesh every known principle of divine parentage and mythological law. Your power feels ancient, primordial, yet you wield it with a control and a maturity that I have never seen. You're a walking, talking cosmological paradox. And as a daughter of Athena, it is incredibly frustrating. He laughed, a genuine, warm sound that seemed to push back the chill of the night air. And you are the single most terrifyingly intelligent person I have ever met, Annabeth Chase. I can literally feel the gears turning in your head from 10 feet away. It's like listening to a supercomputer running advanced calculus. And as a guy who barely passed his academy exams, it is incredibly intimidating. A smile touched her lips, a real one this time. The tension in her shoulders eased. He wasn't just flattering her. He was seeing her, the overwhelming, sometimes isolating, Power of her own mind, and he wasn't threatened by it. He was impressed by it. He was respecting her for the very thing that often made others feel inadequate. In that moment, suspended high above the ocean, a new, deeper connection formed between them, a bond forged not just of shared danger, but of mutual, profound respect. Meanwhile, on the pier below, Piper, Hazel, and Frank were conducting their own investigation. Frank, with his military training, was a surprisingly keen observer of patterns. "The games are all rigged," he muttered. Watching a father spend $40 trying to win a giant stuffed banana for his crying son at a ring toss game. But they're not just rigged to be difficult. They're rigged to be just barely impossible. They give you a flicker of hope, a close call, to make you try again. It's designed to maximize frustration. Hazel felt it differently. She felt the history of the objects. As they passed a claw machine filled with cheap, faded plush toys, she reached out and gently touched the glass. "These aren't new," she whispered, her golden eyes distant. "These toys, they're old. They've been in here for years. I can feel sadness clinging to them. All the kids who wanted them and couldn't get them." Piper was the one who felt the human cost. She saw the arguments between couples, the strained parental smiles, the children on the verge of tantrums. She could feel the waves of disappointment radiating from the game booths. But it was in front of an old, ornate, house of mirrors, at the Veer. Y end of the arcade that the feeling became a physical force. The despair here was a thick, suffocating blanket. "This is it," Piper said, her voice tight. "The source. It's in there." The building was designed to look like a demented circus tent, with a leering clown face painted over the entrance. The mirrors inside were warped and distorted, reflecting twisted, funhouse versions of themselves. But it wasn't the reflections that were wrong. It was the atmosphere. It was cold, unnaturally so, and the air was heavy with the metallic scent of old blood and rusted iron. As they regrouped with Naruto and Annabeth outside the arcade, they shared their findings. "The House of Mirrors," Annabeth confirmed, pointing to its location on a mental map of the pier. "It's the focal point. All the negative energy is being channeled there." "All right," Naruto said, his expression turning serious. "New plan. We go in together. No heroics, no splitting up. Frank, you've got ranged. Stay in the back, watch our flanks. Piper, Hazel, you're mid-guard. Annabeth, you're with me. We press the attack. Whatever is in there, it's had a long time to feed. It's going to be strong." They entered the arcade. The noise was deafening, a relentless assault of bells, buzzers, and synthesized music. Most of the mortals ignored them, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screens, their minds locked in cycles of hope and frustration. As they approached the House of Mirrors, however, two burly security guards stepped forward to block their path. "Sorry, kids," the first one said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "This attraction is closed for a private event. We need to go inside," Annabeth said, her tone firm. The second guard chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "I don't think you heard him. The attraction is closed." Piper stepped forward. "You know what?" she said, her voice infused with a gentle, compelling warmth. "I think you're right. You've had a long night. You and your partner deserve a break. Why don't you go get a nice, long dinner at the end of the pier? On us." She pressed a few of Hazel's mortal dollars into his hand. The guard's eyes glazed over for a moment. A look of blissful relaxation spread across his face. "Dinner," he said, his voice dreamy. "Yeah, come on, George, let's get some dinner." The two of them turned and walked away like puppets whose strings had just been cut. "Nice work," Naruto said with an appreciative nod. They stepped through the leering clown's mouth into the labyrinth of mirrors. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The sounds of the arcade vanished, replaced by an unsettling, profound silence. Their reflections stretched and warped around them, a thousand grotesque versions of themselves watching from every angle. "It's a maze," Annabeth muttered, her hand on her dagger. "Of course it's a maze. Not for long," Naruto said. He closed his eyes, extending his senses. The physical layout of the mirrors was irrelevant. He could feel the cold, hungry core of the place, a knot of psychic energy that pulsed like a diseased heart. "This way," he said, pointing down a corridor that seemed to lead to a dead end. They followed him through the disorienting labyrinth. As they drew closer to the center, they began to see things in the mirrors. Not just their reflections, but images. A lost dog, a broken toy, a failing report card, a wedding ring being thrown into the sea. Each mirror held a perfect, painful tableau of a broken promise or a faded hope. They emerged into a central chamber. The room was circular, its walls lined with hundreds of tarnished, antique mirrors. In the center of the room was a shifting, amorphous creature that seemed to be made of shadow and sorrow. It was a semi-humanoid mass of coagulated despair, constantly changing shape. Within its shadowy form, they could see the objects from the mirrors, broken toys, tarnished jewelry, faded photographs, all held together by a shimmering, oily darkness. It had no face, only a swirling vortex of energy where its head should be. And standing around it, their eyes glowing with a faint, sickly green light, were a dozen people. Tourists, a janitor, the 2 security guards from the entrance. They all held weapons, broken bottles, a discarded pipe, a janitor's key ring held like a flail. Eidolon, Annabeth breathed, her face grim. Possession spirits, they're using the mortals as puppets. The central creature let out a low, psychic hum that vibrated in their bones, a sound of pure, bottomless hunger. And its puppets charged. The fight was a nightmare. They couldn't use lethal force. Frank fired blunted arrows at their feet and shoulders, trying to trip and disable them. Piper tried to use her charm speak, but the Eidolon's malevolent energy seemed to interfere. Her words sliding off them like water off oil. Annabeth and Hazel were forced into a purely defensive battle, parrying and dodging, trying not to hurt the innocent people trying to kill them. Naruto moved through the chaos, his face a mask of cold fury. This was Gaia's work, using the innocent as shields, turning good people into monsters. He dodged a wild swing from a possessed teenager and saw an opening. He didn't strike. He pressed 2 fingers to the boy's forehead. He reached for the third aspect of his power, the cold, silver, absolute authority of the underworld. A chilling, purple-black aura, shot through with silver light, flared around him for a split second. His voice dropped an octave, resonating with a power that was not his own, a voice of finality and command that echoed as if from the bottom of a deep, dark pit. Get out. It was not a request. It was a law of nature being stated. The Eidolon possessing the teenager let out a spectral shriek of pure terror and was ripped from the boy's body. A streamer of green smoke that was immediately pulled into the ground, banished to whatever circle of the underworld it had crawled out of. The boy collapsed, unconscious but unharmed. Naruto became a phantom of judgment. He flowed through the room, a whirlwind of precise, non-lethal movements. A touch to the temple here, a hand on the shoulder there. Each time, the same cold, absolute command. Out. One by one, the Eidolons were torn from their hosts, their screams echoing in the chamber as they were banished by a power they could not defy. He was not just a warrior. He was an exorcist, wielding the authority of the pit itself. In moments, the possessed mortals lay unconscious on the floor, and the 5 of them stood facing the central creature. The amalgam of despair pulsed angrily. Deprived of its minions, it lashed out with a tendril of pure shadow, which Naruto easily sidestepped. "We can't fight it," Annabeth said, her mind racing. "It's not entirely physical. It's made of emotion. Our anger, our aggression, it will just feed it, make it stronger. So we starve it," Naruto said, his eyes locking with Piper's. "You're up, McLean. The prophecy said your charm had to break the chains. I think it's time you broke the chains of despair." Piper looked at the creature, then at Naruto. She saw the absolute faith in his eyes, and it ignited a fire in her own. She remembered his words, "Your voice doesn't take away choice. It offers a new one." She took a step forward, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. Naruto moved to stand just behind her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. He didn't speak. He simply pushed a sliver of his warm, golden life force aura into her, not to control, but to amplify. To act as a speaker for the song she was about to sing. Piper began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, but with Naruto's power behind it, it filled the room, filled their minds, a wave of irresistible, unshakable truth. She didn't speak of victory or fighting. She spoke of hope. She spoke of the father who had spent $40 on a rigged game, not of his frustration, but of the fierce, desperate love for his child that drove him. She spoke of the kids who had wanted the dusty toys in the claw machine, not of their sadness, but of the simple, pure joy they had imagined in owning it. She spoke of first dates, of shared laughter on the Ferris wheel, of the simple, beautiful, and powerful hopes that had brought every single person to this pier tonight. Her voice was a rising tide of pure, concentrated hope, a defiant song against the silent scream of despair. The creature shrieked, a sound of agony this time. The golden light of hope, amplified by Naruto, was anathema to it. It began to dissolve, the objects within it clattering to the floor. The shadows that bound it together sizzled and evaporated, unable to exist in the face of such overwhelming, genuine optimism. With a final, psychic whimper, it imploded, leaving behind nothing but a pile of dusty, forgotten trinkets on the floor of the silent chamber. The cold atmosphere vanished, replaced by a neutral calm. The mirrors now showed only their own, weary reflections. Hazel knelt and picked up a small object from the pile. It was a tarnished silver locket. "There's something inside," she said, her delicate fingers prying it open. Inside, there was no picture, only a single, impossibly black grain of sand and a faint, magical inscription etched into the silver. "Nerus." "Nerus," Annabeth breathed, her eyes wide. "The old man of the sea. A primordial ocean god, older than Poseidon. A shapeshifter and a prophet. And a notorious grump who hates being bothered," Naruto finished, a strange look of recognition on his face. "Looks like we're going for a swim." They slipped out of the House of Mirrors just as the mortal authorities began to arrive, drawn by the unconscious bodies. They melted back into the crowd, 5 shadows leaving a place of manufactured joy that was now, for the first time in a long time, just a little bit brighter. They had a new destination, a new lead, and a new understanding of the strange, synergistic power they wielded as a team. The path ahead led not to land, but to the deep, dark, and ancient waters of the Pacific. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Grasp of the Abyss. The city's artificial lights cast a sick, orange glow upon the waves as they found a deserted stretch of beach south of the pier. The adrenaline of the confrontation in the House of Mirrors was beginning to fade, replaced by a weary exhaustion and the daunting weight of their next task. The Pacific Ocean stretched before them, a vast, black, and inscrutable wilderness. Annabeth held the silver locket in her palm, its metal cool against her skin. "Nerus," she said, her voice a low, focused hum of intellectual energy. "He's one of the protogonoi, the firstborn gods of the sea. Son of Pontus and, ironically, Gaia. He's a prophet, a shapeshifter. And according to every text I've ever read, an incredibly cantankerous old man who values his privacy above all else. So how do we find one grumpy, shapeshifting god in the middle of the world's biggest ocean?" Frank asked, voicing the question on all their minds. He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the surf, the motion a small, familiar comfort in the face of an impossible task. "The myths are specific," Annabeth continued, her mind already sifting through centuries of lore. "You can't just summon him. You have to catch him. You have to find his resting place, usually a rocky islet where he suns himself. And grab him while he's asleep. Then you have to hold on. He'll change shape, fire, water, every beast imaginable, trying to escape. If you can hold on through all his transformations, he is bound by the ancient laws to answer your questions truthfully." "Okay," Piper said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool night air. "So, step 1, find a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. Step 2, grab the needle, which also happens to be a shapeshifting lion squid monster made of fire." Sounds easy enough. Hazel was staring at the locket in Annabeth's hand. "This is the key," she said, her golden eyes reflecting the distant city lights. "He left it for a reason. It's a beacon, or an invitation. It's a link," Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had been silent, his senses extended, feeling the alien vastness of the ocean's life force. It was a chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying symphony of a billion different consciousnesses, from the smallest plankton to the great, slumbering whales in the deep. It was a world teeming with a kind of life he had never experienced, and it was intoxicating. "I can't feel him directly," he explained. "His energy is too old, too different. It's like trying to hear a single instrument in the middle of a hurricane. But I can feel the locket's connection to him. It's not a location. It's a path. ACU. Rent of energy flowing through the ocean that leads to him. He turned to the group, his expression one of calm certainty. We'll need a boat. We can't afford a boat, Frank pointed out glumly. Even with Hazel's gold, chartering a private vessel to a random spot in the ocean is going to raise a lot of mortal questions. He looked down at his own large, powerful hands, a familiar wave of uselessness washing over him. He was the son of the god of war, but what good was that here? Then he paused. A memory surfaced. His grandmother, his mother, the stories of his family line. A lineage that went back to the Argonauts. To Periclymenus, a grandson of Poseidon who could change his shape into any animal. The power was in his blood, a gift from his mother's side that he had always been too afraid, too clumsy, to fully explore. He looked at Hazel's newfound confidence, at Piper's burgeoning strength, at Annabeth's fierce intellect, and at Naruto's unshakable core. He was tired of being the weak link. Maybe we don't need a boat, Frank said, his voice hesitant but determined. My ancestor, he could change his shape into animals. I can do it too. The others looked at him, surprised. You can shapeshift? Annabeth asked, her eyes widening with strategic interest. Into what? I don't know, Frank admitted. It's difficult. I usually end up as a bewildered goldfish or a very clumsy iguana. But I've been feeling stronger since the fight with the basilisks. He looked at Naruto, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The training, the confidence Naruto had shown in him, it had unlocked something. I think if I really focus, I can become something big enough. Something strong enough to carry us. This was his moment, his chance to be more than just tea. He clumsy kid with the cursed piece of firewood. He walked to the water's edge, the waves lapping at his boots. He closed his eyes, his large frame trembling with concentration. He didn't think of a specific animal. He thought of the need for speed, for strength, for the ability to navigate the crushing depths and carry his friends to safety. He reached for the power in his blood, the ancient gift of the sea, and let it consume him. The transformation was not subtle. There was a sickening sound of cracking bones and stretching flesh. His body contorted, expanding, elongating. The others watched, stunned, as Frank Jong, the awkward son of Mars, dissolved into a whirlwind of raw, biological change. In his place, a magnificent creature now lay at the surf's edge. It was massive, easily 30 feet long, with the sleek, powerful body of a great whale, the intelligent, wide-set eyes of a dolphin, and a hide that shimmered like polished obsidian. It was a creature of myth, an ichthyosaur reborn. A living vessel of speed and power. The great creature turned its head and looked at them, and in its intelligent, dolphin-like eyes, they saw Frank. He let out a series of clicks and whistles. A sound filled with a mixture of pride and profound relief. Naruto was the first to react. He grinned, a wide, brilliant smile filled with genuine pride. Well, Frank, he said, walking forward and patting the creature's immense, slick flank. I'd say that's a hell of a lot better than a goldfish. The journey into the abyss was a descent into another world. With Naruto navigating by the psychic thread of the locket and Frank providing the transportation, they plunged into the deep. The world of air and light vanished, replaced by a realm of shifting blues and greens. Sunlight filtered down in shimmering, ethereal beams, illuminating clouds of krill and schools of silverfish that moved as one, a single, fluid organism. Naruto had created a thin, shimmering bubble of air around them. A simple application of his chakra that clung to Frank's back. It was an island of life in the crushing, silent deep. He sat at the front, his eyes closed in concentration, one hand resting on Frank's head, guiding him. The other holding the locket which now glowed with a faint, internal light. The others huddled behind him, their faces a mixture of awe and trepidation. Annabeth felt profoundly out of her element. As a child of Athena, the sea was the domain of her mother's eternal rival. The crushing pressure, the unnatural silence, the three-dimensional battlefield where threats could see from any direction, it was a strategic nightmare. She felt a primal, instinctual unease, and found herself staying close to Naruto, his calm, centered presence a reassuring anchor in the hostile environment. Hazel, too, felt the oppression of the deep. Her connection to the earth, to the metals and stones that were her birthright, was muted here, a distant echo. The sheer weight of the water above her felt like being buried alive. Yet, she found a strange comfort in Frank's new form. His strength, his steady, powerful movement through the water, was a tangible shield against the vast, empty darkness. As they descended further, the world changed again. The light faded completely, plunging them into a realm of absolute blackness, broken only by the strange, beautiful, and terrifying lights of bioluminescent creatures. Ghostly jellyfish pulsed with soft blue light. Anglerfish lured prey with dangling, spectral lanterns. Entire ecosystems thrived around volcanic vents, painting the darkness with chemical fire. It was here, in the crushing, eternal night of the abyssal plane, that they were intercepted. They didn't see them at first. They felt them. A shift in the current. A chorus of alien thoughts brushing against Piper's mind, not hostile, but possessive, territorial. Then, they appeared. Figures of impossible grace and beauty, their bodies a swirling fusion of humanoid form and flowing water. Their hair was kelp, their eyes were pearls, and their skin shimmered with the iridescence of abalone shells. They were Nereids, the 50 daughters of Nerus, and they were not pleased. They surrounded Frank, their movements fluid and impossibly fast. They did not speak in words, but in feelings, in images projected directly into their minds. Trespassers. The air breathers are not welcome in the deep places. Father is not to be disturbed. Turn back, or be consumed by the grasp of the abyss. We mean no harm, Piper projected back, trying to infuse her thoughts with the same warmth and sincerity as her voice. We have a message for Nerus. It is a matter of life and death. The world is in danger. The Nereids' response was a wave of cold, ancient amusement. The world of the surface is not our concern. Your squabbles are as fleeting as the foam on a wave. The deep endures. The deep is eternal. You will leave. The water around them began to churn. A powerful, unnatural whirlpool formed, trying to tear their bubble of air from Frank's back, trying to rip them apart. Frank struggled to maintain his course, his massive body buffeted by the currents. Annabeth gripped the edge of the air bubble, her knuckles white, her mind racing for a strategy against an enemy that was the environment itself. Illusions flooded their minds. Hazel saw the roof of the bunker collapsing on her again. Annabeth felt the burning, dust-filled air of Tartarus in her lungs. Frank saw his lifeline, his piece of wood, crackling into ash. But this time, they were ready. It's not real, Piper shouted, her voice a clarion call of truth within their shared bubble. They're using our fears, just like Gia. Naruto opened his eyes. The Nereids were powerful, their control over the water absolute. A direct confrontation would be futile. Brute force was a language these ancient, elemental beings would laugh at. So he wouldn't use it. He stood up on Frank's back, perfectly balanced amidst the churning chaos. He closed his eyes again and reached for the third, most esoteric aspect of his power. The unraveled thread. The power of Anank. Fate. He didn't see the water or the Nereids. He saw the world as a tapestry of shimmering, multicolored threads. The threads of the currents the Nereids were creating. The threads of the illusions they were weaving. The threads of their own life force, their intentions. Their next movements. It was a dizzying, infinitely complex dance, but to his senses, it had a pattern, a rhythm. And he simply stepped into the dance. He walked to the edge of the air bubble, and stepped out. Into the crushing, freezing water. Annabeth cried out in alarm, but the water didn't touch him. A thin, perfect vacuum of space, no thicker than a coat of paint, formed around his body, protecting him from the pressure and the cold. He stood in the middle of the whirlpool, untouched, a figure of impossible calm in the heart of the storm. A Nereid lunged at him, her body transforming into a spear of hardened water. Naruto didn't dodge. He took a small step to the left, and the spear passed harmlessly by, its own momentum carrying it away. Another created a net of currents to ensnare him. He shifted his weight, and the net passed around him as if he were a ghost. He wasn't fighting them. He was simply moving in a way that made it impossible for their attacks to land. He saw the path of their actions before they were completed, and he placed himself where the path was not. It was a form of precognition so perfect it looked like invulnerability. He wasn't dominating them. He wasn't defeating them. He was making them irrelevant. The Nereids stopped their assault. They floated in the darkness, their pearlescent eyes wide with a feeling no mortal had ever inspired in them. Ah! They were looking at a being who did not bend the laws of their world, but who seemed to exist in the spaces between those laws. He was not of the sea, or the land, or the sky. He was something else. A single thought, from the eldest of the sisters, projected into their minds. It was no longer filled with contempt, but with a deep, grudging respect. Follow. Father will see you. The Nereids turned as one and led them through the darkness, the hostile currents replaced by a gentle, guiding stream. They arrived at a vast, underwater volcano, its caldera glowing, hellish red against the black. Near a fissure venting superheated water and minerals, on a wide shelf of black obsidian, a figure was sleeping. He looked like an old fisherman who had fallen asleep in his boat and been thrown overboard 1,000 years ago. His skin was wrinkled and leathery, the color of driftwood. His long, white beard was tangled with seaweed and tiny, living corals. Barnacles grew on his knuckles. This was Nerus, the old man of the sea. Okay, Annabeth whispered, her voice tense. This is it. Frank, get as close as you can. We all have to grab him at the same time. And no matter what happens, we don't let go. They slid from Frank's back, the bubble of air dissolving as Naruto willed it. They were now breathing a different kind of air, a thin, shimmering film of energy he had placed over their mouths and noses. They moved through the water, silent as shadows. On Annabeth's signal, they lunged. Nerus's eyes snapped open the instant they touched him. They were ancient, milky white, and filled with a profound, cosmic annoyance. He opened his mouth to roar, and the fight was on. He exploded into the form of a colossal squid, his tentacles lashing out, thick as tree trunks. Frank, with a roar of his own, transformed into a great white shark, his powerful jaws locking onto one of the tentacles. Naruto's grip was like a vice, his hands glowing with the golden light of life, reinforcing his own physical strength. Annabeth and Piper held onto another tentacle, their feet braced against the obsidian rock. Hazel, feeling the familiar call of the earth even here, drove her hands into the volcanic shelf, pulling up jagged handholds of obsidian for them to brace against. The squid dissolved, becoming a raging bonfire. The heat was so intense it made the water around them boil and hiss. They screamed, but they held on, Naruto's protective aura shielding them from the worst of the heat. The fire became a lion with fangs of sharpened coral, which Frank, now a grizzly bear, met with a roar. The lion became a swarm of venomous sea snakes, then a block of impossibly dense rock, then a creature of pure, blinding light. Finally, he tried a mental assault. He became a vortex of pure despair, a psychic black hole that showed them their greatest failures. Annabeth saw Luke Castellan dying, blaming her. Hazel saw her mother fading into dust in Asphodel. Frank saw his grandmother's pyre, with his own piece of firewood sitting on top. Hold on. Piper's voice cut through the despair, a charm-speak command fueled not by persuasion, but by a fierce, desperate love for her friends. He's trying to break us. We are stronger than our fears. We are a team. Naruto's will was the anchor. He felt the pull of his own past failures, the faces of those he couldn't save. But he did not see them as chains. He saw them as fuel. He had failed before, and he had gotten stronger. He would not fail now. His grip tightened, unwavering, absolute. With a final, frustrated groan that sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates, the transformation stopped. The cranky, barnacle-encrusted old man was back, held firmly in their grasp. All right, you win. Unhand me, you wretched, persistent land crawlers. He rasped, his voice like stones tumbling in the surf. They let him go, and he furiously brushed himself off, muttering about disrespectful youth and the declining quality of naps. We have questions, Annabeth said, her voice respectful but firm. Yes, I know the rules, Nerus grumbled. Bound to answer. A ridiculous, antiquated law. Fine, ask your questions and be gone with you. We need to know how to defeat Gia, Annabeth said. Nerus cackled, a dry, rattling sound. Defeat Gia? You might as well try to defeat the ground you stand on, girl. She is everything. But, he squinted, his milky eyes focusing on Naruto. You smell of her. But you smell of the pit and the spindle too. A walking impossibility. HMPH. Very well. The giant's bane, the key to her slumber, lies buried where the sky and earth first warred. Where is that? Annabeth pressed. Find the son of the sky god. The one who fell. He carries the memory. Nerus snapped. He then looked at Hazel. The Ghost King's path must be cleared before the doors can be sealed. Death must be put back in order, or all is lost. He gave one final, sweeping, annoyed look at all of them. Quote, Gaia's heart beats strongest in the ancient lands, where the gods were first born and your pathetic squabbles began. And one more thing. His gaze was sharp, and for a moment, the cranky old man was gone. Replaced by a prophet of terrifying clarity. Beware the one who wears two faces. The greatest betrayal will not come from your enemy, but from your friend. Before they could ask another question, he dissolved into a cloud of sea foam and was gone. They floated in the deep, the words of the prophecy hanging in the water between them. They had their answers. A location tied to a son of the sky god. A task for a ghost king to close some doors of death. A warning that their final battle would be in Greece, the old world. And a chilling, personal warning of betrayal. The scale of their quest had just exploded. It was no longer just about them. They had to find the other demigods of the great prophecy. They had to find Jason. They had to find Nico D'Angelo. The path ahead was no longer a straight line, but a complex, tangled web of destinies. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Scar on the Earth. They surfaced in a world painted in the soft, pre-dawn hues of gray and rose. Frank, his magnificent ichthyosaur form shrinking with a series of groans and pops back into his familiar, clumsy human shape, collapsed onto the wet sand, utterly spent. The transition from the crushing, silent abyss to the open, breathing world was a violent rebirth. For a long moment, the only sounds were their ragged gasps for air and the gentle, rhythmic sigh of the surf. The weight of Nerus's prophecy settled upon them, colder and heavier than the midnight ocean. Annabeth, ever the scholar, had already retrieved a waterproof notebook and a pen from her pack and was kneeling on the beach, scratching down the words before they could fade. Okay, she said, her voice sharp with a focus that fought back the exhaustion. Let's break it down. Item 1. The giant's bane. It's what we need to put Gaia back to sleep. Its location is where the sky and earth first warred. That's vague. Could be the site of Uranos's original fall, which would be in the ancient lands. Or it could be symbolic. Find the son of the sky god. The one who fell, Piper quoted, her brow furrowed. That has to be Jason Grace. He's the son of Jupiter who fell into the Grand Canyon with amnesia. That's a pretty literal interpretation. It fits. Naruto agreed, his gaze distant as he stared at the lightening eastern sky. The Grand Canyon is a wound in the earth created by the Skice River. A place of conflict between the two domains. It's the most logical place to start looking for him, or at least his trail. Item 2, Annabeth continued, ticking a point in her notebook. The Ghost King's path must be cleared before the doors can be sealed. Ghost King is Nico D'Angelo, no question. Son of Hades. And doors. That sounds like the doors of death. If they're open, monsters can just endlessly reform in the mortal world. That's a problem for another team, or another time. Our path is Jason, and the final battle is in Greece, Hazel said softly, her golden eyes wide with the scale of it all. Where it all began. There was a tense silence as the final piece of the prophecy hung unspoken in the air. Frank, now sitting up and wrapped in a spare blanket, was the one to voice it. What about the last part? Beware the one who wears two faces. The greatest betrayal will not come from your enemy, but from your friend. His words were a stone dropped into the calm surface of their newfound teamwork. The easy camaraderie they had forged in the face of Gaia's whispers and Nerus's transformations evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping mist of suspicion. 5 pairs of eyes flickered, subtly, from one face to another. Annabeth's mind, a finely tuned instrument of logic and strategy, immediately began to run calculations. A friend, one of us, or one of the 7 mentioned in the other prophecy. A Roman, a Greek. Frank has his family's honor. Hazel has her past. Piper has her father, a potential hostage. Naruto is the powerful unknown. And me, even I have my fatal flaw. Her expression became guarded, her gray eyes turning from a warm campfire to cold, analytical stones. Piper felt the shift as a physical blow. The trust, the hope she had so carefully woven with her voice in the House of Mirrors, was unraveling. "Guys, we can't," she pleaded, her voice laced with an unconscious charm of unity. "That's what Gia wants, for us to doubt each other. We can't let her win before the fight even starts." But the poison was already seeping in. Frank and Hazel drew closer together, a silent, defensive pact. They were the Romans, the outsiders in this small group. The term, two faces, could easily apply to them. Caught between their loyalty to their legion and this new alliance. Naruto had remained silent, watching, feeling the poisonous tendrils of doubt snake their way into the heart of his team. He had seen this before. He had lived it. The slow, agonizing corrosion of friendship by suspicion and fear was a story he knew by heart. He stepped into the center of their loose, fractured circle. "Annabeth," he said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the tension. "You're thinking about probabilities, calculating who is the most likely to betray us based on their history and weaknesses." She didn't deny it, simply lifted her chin in defiance. "It's the logical thing to do." "No," he said, his voice softening but losing none of its authority. "It's the easy thing to do. Logic and suspicion are tools. But trust is a choice. It is a weapon. In my world, I had a friend. He was my brother. And he betrayed all of us. He chose a path of darkness and hatred. For years, everyone told me to give up on him. To treat him as an enemy, to kill him. It was the logical thing to do." He looked at each of them, his gaze holding a profound, ancient sadness, but also an unshakable strength. "I never gave up on him. I never stopped trusting that the friend I knew was still in there. In the end, it was that trust, that refusal to give up, that saved not just him, but the entire world." He walked over and stood in front of Frank and Hazel. "The prophecy is a warning, not a sentence. It's a test. Gia and the Fates, they're betting that we'll break. That the fear of bitter ale will be stronger than the bonds we've forged. They're betting we'll choose suspicion over faith." He turned back to Annabeth and Piper. "I'm not going to play their game. I choose to trust every single person standing here. Not because I'm naive, but because the alternative is to let Gia win right now, on this beach. The moment we start looking at each other as potential enemies, we've already lost. So, that's my decision. What's yours?" His words, simple and powerful, reset the emotional landscape. He hadn't dismissed their fears, he had acknowledged them and offered a better, stronger path. He was the fulcrum, and he had just refused to let them pivot towards self-destruction. Annabeth was the first to break. A long, slow breath escaped her lips, and the hard, analytical light in her eyes softened. "You're right," she conceded, her voice low. "Suspicion is a cage. My mother would be ashamed of me." Piper gave a watery smile, a wave of relief washing over her. One by one, the walls came down. The choice was made. They would face this new threat as they had faced all the others, together. The journey from the California coast to the Grand Canyon was a pilgrimage into the Heir. Of a different kind of abyss. The vast, sun-scorched emptiness of the American Southwest. The lush greens and cool blues of the coastline gave way to a stark, brutal palette of ochre, rust, and bleached bone. The air grew thin and dry, smelling of dust and the sharp, herbal scent of creosote bushes. The sky was a vast, unforgiving dome of brilliant blue, and the sun was a physical weight, a hammer that beat down upon them. They traveled by night and rested during the brutal heat of the day, using Hazel's knowledge of the earth to find cool, hidden arroyos and shallow caves to shelter in. The landscape was beautiful in its own savage way, a place of sweeping mesas and jagged, wind-carved rock formations that looked like the bones of forgotten gods. But it was Gaia's territory, through and through. They could feel her, sleeping but aware, a malevolent presence that was in the very dust they walked on. After days of grueling travel, they arrived. The Grand Canyon was not a sight to be seen, but a presence to be felt. It was a sudden, breathtaking violation of the landscape, a chasm so vast and profound it seemed to defy reality. It was a scar, a testament to an ancient, elemental war between water and rock, sky and earth. They stood on the edge of the south rim, near the abandoned glass structure of the skywalk. The afternoon sun painted the canyon's depths in shifting layers of red, orange, and purple. He was here, Naruto said, his voice a low murmur. He closed his eyes, his senses reaching out, not to the living world, but to the psychic echoes of the past. There was a battle, a big one. I can taste it, ozone, from a massive electrical discharge. The smell of burnt monster ichor. And something else. Wind. A lot of angry wind. Storm spirits, Annabeth identified immediately. Venti. Jason fought them here when he first arrived at Camp Half-Blood. Most of them were dispersed, Naruto said, his brow furrowed in concentration. But not all. Some were infected, twisted. He opened his eyes and pointed toward the deserted skywalk. Gia left something behind. A trap. A lingering infection, feeding on the memory of the battle. It's waiting in there. The skywalk was an architectural marvel. A U-shaped glass bridge that jutted out over the canyon's edge, offering a dizzying view of the 4,000-foot drop to the Colorado River below. But as they approached, they could see it was no longer a pristine tourist attraction. The glass was cracked and stained with a strange, gritty dust. The air around it felt heavy, charged with a low, mournful hum. As they stepped onto the glass bridge, the wind picked up, a low, moaning sound that seemed to come from the canyon's depths. But it wasn't a natural wind. Swirling clouds of dust and sand began to rise from the canyon floor. Coalescing on the bridge, they took on vague, humanoid shapes, their forms constantly shifting, their eyes glowing with a dull, despairing light. They were Anemoi Thuli, the storm spirits, but they were wrong. Their airy forms were heavy, weighed down with the dust of the earth, their movements sluggish and sorrowful. A chorus of whispers echoed around them, the voices of the wind. But filled with the same despair they had heard on the beach. Fallen, broken, abandoned by the sky, we are left to the dust is all. Gia corrupted them, Hazel said, her golden eyes wide with a horrified understanding. She took the spirits Jason defeated and bound them to the earth. They're part wind, part dust. That's how we fight them, Annabeth realized, her mind making the connection in a flash. They're not fully ethereal anymore. Hazel, they're bound to the earth. Can you control them? Hazel looked at the swirling dust devils, her heart pounding. She had never tried to control something so unsolid. But she remembered Naruto's words. You're the warden. She closed her eyes and reached out, not to the gold or the gems, but to the base, common particles of silicate. ND feldspar that made up the spirits, new bodies. She felt a connection, a sluggish, heavy resistance. I can feel them, she gritted out, her hands outstretched. They're heavy, so heavy. With a cry of effort, she clenched her fists. The dust spirits shrieked as their forms were suddenly compressed, made solid. For a fleeting second, they became living statues of sandstone, frozen in their tormented shapes. Now, Frank, Annabeth commanded. Frank had already knocked an arrow. He let it fly. It struck one of the solidified spirits square in the chest, and the creature shattered into a shower of inert dust that was quickly whipped away by the wind. But there were too many. Hazel's control slipped, and the remaining spirits dissolved back into swirling, invulnerable clouds. They swarmed forward, their whispering voices rising in volume, a psychic assault of pure misery. You will fall too. The hero will abandon you. The quest will fail. You are nothing but dust. Piper. Naruto's voice cut through the chaos. They're fighting with despair. Give them some hope. Piper didn't hesitate. She put 2 fingers in her mouth and let out a piercingly loud whistle. It wasn't a sound of alarm, but an impossibly cheerful, jaunty tune. The kind you might hear in an old, upbeat cartoon. It was so unexpected, so completely at odds with the spirits' mournful assault, that it shattered their psychic rhythm. She followed it with a flood of charm speak, not a command, but a broadcast of defiant joy. You're not dust. You're the wind. You're the sky. Remember what it's like to be free. Her voice, a beacon of pure, unadulterated optimism, made the spirits recoil. Their despair was their strength, and her joy was poison to them. As the spirits faltered, one, larger than the rest, rose to face them. This one was more focused. Its form a whirlwind of black dust and jagged rock shards. This was the leader, the core of the infection. It let out a concentrated blast of wind and despair directly at Naruto. Naruto didn't move. He simply stood his ground and let the blast wash over him. The wind whipped his hair and clothes, but the psychic assault found nothing to hold onto, a wave crashing against an unshakable cliff. He took a single step forward, and the air around him grew cold. The silver and purple aura of the underworld flared around him, a stark contrast to the brilliant blue sky. "You were bound by the earth," he said. His voice a low, resonant command that seemed to make the very glass beneath his feet vibrate. "You were chained by despair." He raised a hand, his palm open. "I'm offering you a different path. Freedom." He moved, a blur of motion, directly into the heart of the dust storm. Hazel, feeling his intent, focused all her power on the lead spirit, forcing it into a solid humanoid form for just a moment. It was all the time Naruto needed. He placed his hand on the spirit's chest. He didn't use the command to banish. He used a different one. A word of cleansing, of absolution, of severing. Release. It was not an attack. It was an unbinding. The earthy, Gaian corruption was ripped from the spirit with a terrifying, silent violence. The black dust and rock shards exploded outward, away from the spirit's core, turning into a cloud of harmless sand that cascaded over the edge of the canyon. What was left was a being of pure, shimmering wind, its form translucent and bright. It hovered before Naruto for a moment, its form that of a handsome, terrified young man. It bowed its head in a gesture of profound gratitude. "Thank you, heir of three worlds," its voice whispered, not with despair, but with the clear, clean sound of the wind. "The mother's grasp is broken. My brothers are free." The other, smaller spirits, cleansed by the leader's release, swirled around him, their mournful cries turning into a joyful chorus. "We're looking for your former master," Annabeth said quickly, seizing the opportunity. "Jason Grace. Where is he?" The spirit turned its clear, windy eyes to the east. "The flying ship," it whispered. "The second Argo. They gathered the Legion's eagle in the west. Now they fly east, toward the Sea of Monsters, and then to the ancient lands. They follow the path of the giants." With a final, grateful gust of wind that felt like a cool, refreshing breeze, the spirits dissolved, their forms breaking apart to become one with the vast, open sky of the canyon, finally free. Silence descended upon the skywalk, the only sound the natural, clean wind whistling up from the canyon depths. The psychic scar was gone, the air clean and light. They had their next clue. Jason and the rest of the prophesied seven were on a flying ship, a new Argo. And they were heading east. The two halves of the great prophecy were finally on a collision course. "A flying ship," Frank said, a look of awe on his face. "Leave it to a son of Jupiter to travel in style." "They're heading for the Sea of Monsters," Annabeth mused, her mind already calculating routes and timelines. "That's the Bermuda Triangle, and then to Rome, to Greece. They're on the move, and they're moving fast. We'll never catch them on foot." "Then we won't travel on foot," Naruto said, a confident grin spreading across his face as he looked up at the vast, empty sky. "We'll just have to find a faster way to fly." Chapter 8 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.